All right, back on the conversation. We've got a guest for you guys to talk about something that's very controversial online right now. It is reporting about something called the Riot Squad. So Rob Mackey's going to join us. He's a senior writer at The Intercept. He used to be the writer at the New York Times for their breaking news blog, The Lead, etc. And Rob has written about the Riot Squad, and that has led to some controversy. So Rob, welcome to the show. And tell us, first of all, what the hell's the Riot Squad?
Well, this is basically a sort of informal group of young field reporters for conservative news sites and YouTube channels. And they have traveled the country over the past year, basically since George Floyd's death, reporting on the protest movement, which is obviously a good thing to do, that people should report on it. But what I found I came across this group basically by trying to figure out where a lot of viral videos from protests came from. And a lot of the most viral videos were of violent events, sort of on the fringes, very often not really connected to protests, but things that were videotaped in front of journalists and went totally crazy on social media. They were seen tens of millions of times. And then what's happened is that a lot of times that sort of dominates the coverage, especially on Fox News. So this is a group of 7 or 8, it's a loose group of friends and rivals from conservative sites who've been documenting the protests, but with an incredibly disproportionate, I would say, focus on images of violence, of windows being broken, of people getting in fights at the protests. And in my research, I discovered that a really good tracker of the protests last year showed that there were about 10,300 Black Lives Matter associated protests. And there was only violence at about 6% of them, only violence of any kind. And what I think we can say when we look at the conservative media is that if you watch that, if you watch Fox News and you see all these clips played over and over and over, you would think that the other 94% of entirely peaceful protests didn't happen. And so that's why I think it's important to look at this work and try to understand how influential it's been to forming people's opinions.
So look, I'm not at all surprised by the right-wing media. Look at angry black people, they're all violent. And is that what they're driving towards? Yes, absolutely, positively, no question about it. They never give you the context of, but 94% of these protests were perfectly peaceful. By the way, in that 6%, a lot of the violence was started by police originally. So I know they're not gonna give that context. What I'm surprised by is anyone attacking you guys for covering the story. So now, I'm also surprised you call them journalists. So that's an interesting conversation, because in the old days they did have journalists, William Safire, David Frum, etc. Now I hated those guys too. Don't get me wrong. David Frum started the war and helped to start the war in Iraq and has a lot of issues, right? But in the old days they wouldn't just lie, right? They would frame things in a deceptive way, but they would be technically correct, etc. Right? Usually, most of the time. In the new days, I would never trust someone that called himself a right-wing journalist. I would have to have overwhelming evidence before I trust them, because almost everything we've ever covered was deceptively edited videos. If someone from the right wing gave me a video and said, here's the video, I said, there's no way that video is true. I would have to have forensic evidence to believe that video. Why? Because I hate the right wing? No, but because I've seen in dozens of cases that they doctor the videos. They do it as a matter of course. Fox News has no journalistic standards. They'll put doctored videos on air without blinking twice, or thinking twice or blinking, either way. So do you think they're actually journalists?
Yeah, I mean, that was something when I set out to look at this, the first pieces I was looking at, there's a guy named Elijah Schaffer who is a sort of pundit and reporter for Glenn Beck's Blaze TV. He, at a protest in Dallas last year, it was just very obviously deceptively edited some footage. He put out a clip that was seen 35 million times on Twitter alone of a guy who was at a protest, a white guy, getting beaten up pretty brutally by protesters. It went everywhere. Trump mentioned it, boosted it on Twitter, brought it up as tear gas was being fired at protesters outside the White House to sort of smear the whole movement. And what came to light from other witnesses who were there is that this guy who was seen at the end of the event being beaten up had confronted the protesters. He later admitted himself that he started the confrontation by going to a bunch of marchers marching through his neighborhood with a machete. And then when they picked up some rocks and tried to like fend him off, he backed up a bit, charged at them, shrieking, and cut one of them. And then that's what you see at the end is they beat the hell out of him. It was a brutal beating, absolutely, that's true. No one supports that. But that's absolutely true that a huge problem here is deceptive editing and people receiving these little clips, these little glimpses of information on their phones very often with no other context and with no way of checking to see what happened first. So I did document a few cases like that that are really totally egregious. I think that's important to understand that that's part of what goes on. But I would say, on the question of whether, and I think left-wing protesters often view these people as political activists. They don't see them as journalists. My feeling is that if you go in the field and you film something and you report on it, it's a kind of reporting in journalism. I would hope that it's ethical, and sometimes it's not like that. But there are other people who do actually report accurately. They take video accurately of things they see that are sort of outrageous that happen in front of them. But the question then is, how is that processed on social media and in the right-wing media, especially on Fox News? Almost all of these people are regularly appearing on Fox News to talk about their clips. But they'll do something like in a protest in Philadelphia in October when Walter Wallace Jr. was killed by the police. The video of him being shot on camera sparked protests in West Philly, where he was from. The next day, a lot of these people, 5 of these journalists for conservative sites, showed up to film protests. I think they were expecting something bad to happen. There were peaceful protests, which isn't really very good for them. They went to a police station with people who screamed at the police, but there was nothing going viral basically because there was no violence. There was nothing getting out of hand. Then there was a report that way across town, a 30-minute drive away, 10 miles away in a retail park that had nothing to do with this neighborhood, nothing to do with protests, there was some looting. So they got in the car and they drove over and filmed the looting. And the looting was the main story on Fox News, basically over and over on a loop for 2 days. And also at that protest, the guy I mentioned, Elijah Schaffer, who had misleadingly edited footage in Dallas, he went into a discount store that was being looted with his camera, was filming, was told by the looters to stop filming. I guess he didn't get away entirely at first or quickly enough, and they punched him in the mouth. And then he was a featured guest on Tucker Carlson 2 days later. The video of him being punched in the mouth went viral. And you would have no idea that anything happened in Philadelphia if you watch a conservative media, except these people attacking this right-wing journalist. And he went on the air and went on Tucker Carlson and on Blaze TV and said that he was attacked by what he called Black Lives Matter protesters. There was no protest in that part of Philadelphia. It's a totally different place. It's practically in New Jersey. And these were looters who were taking advantage of sort of an opportunity where the police were overwhelmed. So this is an example where you have people going to a protest, they film what happens, it doesn't take off for them, then they film a totally unrelated event because that fits the narrative.
Yeah.
And so I would say that it's a thing where you have to look at a kind of broader picture than just deceptive editing. It's selective what they film and what they say about it. And by saying that they were protesters, that's a flat out lie.
Yeah, that's the least surprising thing I've ever heard. And by the way, if a black person had attacked white people with a machete, how do you think they would have covered that instead? Do you think they would have left that part out? If a bunch of white people were brutally beating a black man, but the right wing knew that the black man had attacked them with a machete earlier, do you think they would have left that part out? Right, so it's just absurd, it's absurd. They're not journalists. And so I can't say it about all of them, but the instances where you have the selective editing, which is, in my experience, the ones that have made it to enough of a controversy, almost every one of them was selectively edited. And so people attacked you guys though for talking about this phenomenon. Well, it would appear at the bare minimum that you were doing journalism in covering this phenomenon. So what on God's green earth did they have to complain about? What, are they just supposed to butcher these videos and you're not allowed to talk about it? What's the claim? One part of the claim is that on Fox News, on Laura Ingraham's show, there was the idea, it was claimed that we were
intentionally trying to expose the identities of these journalists so that they couldn't report and would get beat up by Antifa. And in fact, these are public figures. They've all been on Fox News. They're all regularly, the person that we were specifically talking about in that case had just been on Laura Ingraham. So they're familiar faces if you watch the right-wing media. Left-wing protesters are not idiots. They're watching live streams. They're watching the right-wing media. They have been talking about trying to interfere with these people getting footage of their protests for almost an entire year. And only recently it has happened that a couple of them were beaten up at left-wing protests. One in Detroit in April, another one a week later in LA in April. People were spotted. They become familiar faces to people on the left, and they're told they're not welcome there, and they were assaulted. And in our article, the article that accompanies the video, we talk about this, we report this as a phenomenon, and we denounce the violence against anybody.
Rob Mackey, thank you for doing actual journalism. We appreciate it. Everybody check out the stories, and it gives you important context for what you see online. Because if you're getting it from the right wing, in my opinion, most of the time, it is not what it appears. All right, thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
We are on to something that is going to be amazing, but what we need is your help.
The number one problem is there's too much power in too few hands.
Every single problem that we have can be traced back to dark money.
They take large donors, they serve large donors.
So these handful of gatekeepers try to dictate everything.
Like all of you already know, they don't work for you, they work for their donors. So fire them and hire people who will only work for you that say no corporate backed money.
We are going to change the way we elect candidates in this country.
Uncorrupted Democrats. We're gonna fight for the issues and win on policy.
This is incredibly personal. We need free healthcare for everyone.
We're fighting for $15 minimum wage, single payer healthcare, debt-free college, and we are gonna get money out of politics once and for all.
I've taken a public pledge not to accept any corporate money.
Because the last thing we're gonna do is go into another presidential election and run a corporatist against a populist candidate.
At some point, the buck needs to stop, and it's gonna stop with us. It's gonna stop with Justice Democrats.
So who are we?
People who do not take corporate PAC money.
We're relying on small donors.
99.9% of our contributions came from people.
You're a Just Democrat, so you don't take any corporate PAC money.
I'm not influenced by money.
As a Justice Democrat, I made that pledge.
Not a penny.
Absolutely no.
I will go to Congress unbossed and unbought.
We try to create a government which works for all of us.
That is what America's about, and that's what a representative democracy should be about.
We are just getting warmed up here.
Vote for uncorrupted Democrats. The fight starts now, it starts today, and it starts with you.
I've been honest with him. Like, yeah, I was upset with you and I shouldn't have done it. But instead I was like, I'm just trying to protect my engagement ring.
Did you know that more than 20% of the world's oxygen comes from the Amazon? Why? Because of trees. I know what you're thinking. Of course! So what do we want to do? We want to plant more trees so we can save the climate. It's quite literal. So that's what leads to our new partner, Plant Your Change. Love it. It's so easy. What they do is you take the credit or debit cards you already have and you plug it into the system. And if you so choose, you get to round up every purchase to the nearest dollar and they plant a tree for you. Okay. Now you could also choose if you want to do it on only certain kinds of purchases or only so often, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But literally every cent makes a difference here. It's Plant Your Change. And if you want to know more information, just go to tyt.com/trees. Let's go save the planet together.
Now, top. No. No.
today, terrible day for the internet, terrible day for America. The internet as we know it is not going to exist anymore.
A real dark day for information, and yet another way that they're bleeding out the democracy.
We're now going to have these gatekeepers of information deciding what we can and can't see, and that's what scares me the most.
Whether you're conservative or progressive or anywhere in the middle, this is the one thing we should all agree to. Protect the internet, because the establishment is coming for it. Don't let them destroy the internet. Back on the conversation. Well, we got an amazing race in North Carolina for the Senate seat. That's coming up in 2022. Richard Burr is retiring. On the right-wing side, you have former Governor Pat McCrory, who normally would at least win the Republican nomination, but he's in trouble because he did not agree with every single sentence that Donald Trump spoke. I'm not kidding. So they're saying, well, he was not 100% loyal to Donald Trump. He dared to disagree with the dear leader, so he might not win. Lara Trump might join the race, and she might win the nomination. We'll find out about that. But on the Democratic side, there's also drama. And the person who nearly, well, certainly was in a position to win last time is back in it this time, and that's who we're going to talk to. Erica Smith joins us now. She's an educator, a minister, and a former state senator. Erica, welcome to TYT.
Thank you. It's so good to be back, Cenk.
Great to have you. So, Erica, last time you ran in 2020, and the establishment did not support you. Now you're a state senator. There's no reason for them not to support you. Well, you're for Medicare for all, Green New Deal, higher minimum wage, etc. So maybe there's a reason. But tell us what the status of the race was and what happened with Cal Cunningham, who came into the race.
Absolutely, Cenk. So in the last cycle, 2020 cycle, I was the front runner running in the U.S. Senate race. I was beating Thom Tillis in every head-to-head poll, beating him by wider margins. And unfortunately, the DS interfered and recruited Cal Cunningham from the lieutenant governor's race that he'd been running in for about a year and recruited him into the U.S. Senate race. And as we can see, that was a colossal mistake. And it ended up costing us the state of North Carolina. We could have certainly flipped blue. We had a wonderful opportunity to do it, but that did not happen.
I'm so sick of the Democratic Senate committees coming in and thinking, oh, we got it. We know Amy McGrath, Cal Cunningham, the usual suspects, right? Wealthy white person, hopefully with a business and or military background. I've seen this movie 1,000 times and they all lose. They all lose, and it never changes their strategy. So how much you were beating Thom Tillis, how much did Cal Cunningham lose by?
He lost by about 4 percentage points.
Yeah, in other words, it was winnable. It was definitely winnable. And now it's winnable again against Richard Burr. So now you're running again, so I'm sure the establishment has someone else in mind. I mean, Erica, wouldn't it make sense that, hey, there was polling showing that you were going to win last time. You're a state senator. Now we got him. Now let's do this. Let's correct our mistake. But I'm going to guess that the establishment in the Democratic Party is not yet supporting.
Well, Cenk, let's just face it. I have never been an establishment candidate. I'm the constituents candidate. When I ran for state senate in 2014, I unseated the longest sitting Democrat who was pushing payday lenders, payday loans in the communities that he was serving. There was a high minority population, a high marginalized community. And so it's no secret that I've angered some in the establishment along the way because I've been willing to stand up, even to Democratic Party leadership, to push the bold, progressive initiatives that the people in this state and in this country really, really want. And so we're cautiously optimistic. We have spoken to the DSCC. Certainly Senator Chuck Schumer stated that he regretted interfering and recruiting Cal Cunningham in the last cycle. The DS, as a rule, has said that they are not going to interfere into the primary elections. You called it. We saw what happened in in Kentucky with Charles Booker, and I'm so glad to see him running again, hood to holler. But we have to really not continue to run this old playbook and this antiquated notion of electability. There's a new face of electability in the South.
That's absolutely right, like Reverend Warnock. And yeah, and by the way, Stacey Abrams, because she actually won that race in Georgia. And so Erica, let me go further in this. So the establishment usually will say, and my guess is the press will say, yes, but if you run on Medicare for all in a state like North Carolina, you can't win. They would just blanket say that, right? As if they have polling to prove that, et cetera. They don't have the polling, I know that. But how do you respond to a charge like that?
This is how I respond to that, Jink. We are trying to do the impossible in North Carolina, and we know that we can get it done. This past year, if nothing else, should have shown us with this COVID-19 pandemic just how broken our healthcare system is. A system that prioritizes profits over people. A system where we had 560,000 Americans die from COVID, and a third of them died because they did not have health insurance. If we can't talk about Medicare for all coming through a worldwide pandemic, then when can we talk about it? We know that these are bold, this is a bold platform, but we know that we have big problems, big challenges working families are facing all over this state. There is overwhelming support for Medicare for all, and so that's what we're fighting for. We are fighting for those bold solutions that we know the people on the sidelines have been waiting for. They've been waiting for someone who's going to fight for the Green New Deal, who's going to fight for UBI, who's going to fight for workers, their right to unionize, but also to have a livable wage.
This is the time when I give the website, ericaforus.com. So Erica does not take corporate PAC money. So we will put these links down below if you want to click on them, if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook. But ericaforus.com, she's bold, she's strong, you just heard it right there. Almost all the politicians have tucked tail and run for Medicare for all, and you're still running on it in the state of North Carolina, and that is very strong. And
Jake, especially what I wanted to share is that I've had a personal experience. My family, we almost went bankrupt because I gave birth to a medically fragile son. He had a tracheostomy. I came home. My employer-based insurance gave me 4 hours of nursing care, did not pay for all of the medical equipment that he needed. No other family under my watch is going to have to face bankruptcy because someone gets sick or not be able to afford the life-saving health care that their family members need. I had to get a part-time job at an alternative school just to be able to pay for the humidifiers, the nosies that went over Elias's tracheostomy. And so healthcare for me, it's a right. It's a basic human right. And with the lived experiences of so many North Carolinians who have this same struggle, this is why I fight so hard. We must have Medicare for all.
So look, there's two elements to that. Number one, when you fight that hard for a position that is very popular in the country, but not yet popular in the Democratic Party leadership, then I believe you when you say you're going to fight for filibuster reform. Because all the Democrats say that, but then they get into Congress and they don't do anything about it, right? And so, but number two, on the issue of the healthcare as a right, look, if you took that message to the people of North Carolina, you'd be Larry Trump or McCrory or anyone else, and metaphorically, you'd beat him with a stick. So then I got to ask you about the press, because usually the number one problem isn't the message, it's the press. So, but I don't know in your specific instance. So both the last time around and this time around, have they given you a fair hearing? Have they talked about the upsides and downsides of your policy? Or has it been characterized as, here's Cal Cunningham has the money, so he's the real candidate, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually what they do, but I don't know what happened in North Carolina.
Well, I can't say last cycle. The press had a hard time trying to figure out what the policies and platform was for the other Democratic candidates. And so just as last time, as this time, I am the only candidate who is a progressive. I am the only one who has shared a comprehensive plan to address the issues and solve the problems faced by so many North Carolinians. And the press this time around has certainly highlighted our progressive agenda, and I, have had several conversations, and I told them, you can call it what you want. It's a survivor's agenda, and we deserve to thrive now. There have been so many people who have just learned just how broken our economic systems are coming out of this pandemic, and so I'm happy to fight for it. The press has been covering it, and this time around, they have been sharing that we do have a progressive platform, but they've also shared that I'm the only candidate who has a platform, and voters will know where we stand on the issues.
All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Erica.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
All right, we need you to welcome to the Young Turks. That's not a real sentence, but nonetheless, Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian. We need you to be welcome. And we've got a lot of stories. You know that. So Anna found a story on the going-ons.
What's wrong with you today?
I know, right? What kind of statement is that? Anyway, phrase that.
Strong start.
Killing it so far. She found a story about how the Israeli-Palestinian issue is being covered in the press that I think is amazing, fascinating, etc. Can't wait to talk about it because it's going to give you a sense of how journalism works and doesn't work in this country. It's so real and it's so interesting because of that. And then of course, Texans going more crazy, more out of control. Legislation throughout the country, and you know the usual spiel. But it's going to be an amazing show. And by the way, speaking of shows, one last thing for now. Tonight we also have Old School. Don't forget that. That's at 7 o'clock Eastern. It's live now. That's why I'm sorry. 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. That's why I'm pointing it out now, because you guys, everybody can watch it live and free. We're going to have a controversy about Instagram tonight. A rare story planned for Old School. So it's gonna be myself, Ben Mankiewicz, and Mark Thompson, truly an Old School cast. And you guys are gonna love it. Look, it's not a big deal, but you guys are gonna love it. And then we got a bonus episode for you tonight here and a bonus episode for Old School as well. How do you get those? Well, tyt.com/join. Obviously, there's also a join button below on YouTube. You guys get it, Casper.
All right, first I just want to say congratulations. No, let's put that guy down for a second, okay?
Yeah. Really.
Aishwarya is filling in for Brett for the next month and a half, I believe, as supervising producer. She's fantastic. Everybody give her a round of applause because she's killing it. And I'm so proud of her and so blessed to have her on our team. So,
okay.
All right.
Who thanks their staff in the beginning of a show?
Gotta do it.
We do.
Gotta do it.
Because we care. All right.
All right. Well, now let's put that guy back up. Let's talk about Ron Johnson and his whiny little ways.
Put the Johnson back. All right. Just throw it wrong.
Republican Senator Ron Johnson wants to get everyone back to work, including women who can't afford childcare and who were literally forced to stay out of the workforce to take care of their children during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, he was confronted with a common sense question about how unaffordable childcare is and how that is letting or forcing women, I should say, to stay home and leave the job market. And so I want to give you the question from the reporter before I give you his answer, because Johnson actually thinks that the problem now is that wages are too high. It's a big issue. I'm not even kidding. Now, the question from the reporter is this: what about the argument that this situation is kind of shining a light on some of the out of control costs, the increase in costs that wages haven't kept up with for folks like things like childcare? A lot of women are choosing not to go back into the workforce right now because at the end of the day, it's a complete wash. Their wages would simply cover the cost of having to pay for childcare that they don't have to pay for now. That is an excellent question from a local news reporter, and I want to commend him for that. Now, unfortunately, he's talking to a buffoon, and he got a buffoonish answer in response. Ron Johnson responded by saying that, the problem is wages are actually too high. He says businesses pay what wages they can afford based on the competitive situation, whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's in manufacturing, where they're competing against foreign manufacturers. I just have greater faith in the marketplace setting appropriate wage rates. But there's no doubt about it, wage rates are now being bid up because there is a labor shortage. And if you're a worker, that's a good thing. But then he continues to make the case that higher wages are actually really hurting everyone. This is what he says: increase in wage rates ratchet up, and that creates permanent inflation. You can hear the GOP repeating the word inflation over and over again, and they're deflecting by blaming the wrong reasons, right? So you may feel good about getting a 5 or 6 or 7% raise, but if general inflation is 6, 7, or 8%, that increase is just completely wiped out. That's what the marketplace does. I am highly concerned that what we're looking at right now is a witch's brew with all the ingredients for stagflation. So what he's referring to here is, and I'm sure many of you have experienced it, an increase in prices for honestly things that people need to survive. You might have noticed that the cost of housing, for instance, has gone up considerably. And part of the reason why is because there is honestly a higher price for lumber. The production of lumber was halted during the pandemic. It takes a while to get the process back up and running again. And so as there's a lack of supply and higher demand for housing, obviously it's going to drive up the cost of housing. But that's just part of the equation. Let's also talk about the fact that interest rates have provided cheap money to investors who then take that money and buy up all these houses as investments, as speculators. He doesn't talk about that. He doesn't talk about raising interest rates that have been ridiculously low for quite some time now by the Federal Reserve. He doesn't want to talk about that because he and his cronies benefit from that. But when it comes to wages, he's going to go ahead and blame that for inflation, and that is not the story here.
So Anna makes a sophisticated argument, and the facts about inflation versus wages are really important. And I want to get back to some of that in a second. But let's just note that a Republican senator, a United States senator, just said your wages should be lower, not higher.
Yep.
That's amazing. And so that would never happen in a normal democracy. Even if they actually believed that, they would normally hide it if they thought the voters actually decided elections. But Ron Johnson is of the mind, and he has historically been right for the last 40 years. Now, since the Just Democrats have come on board, the equation has changed a little bit. But he's been largely right that no, donors decide elections. So Ron Johnson is going on television and saying, yeah, I work for big business. I want your wages to be lower. I mean, it's spitting in the face of the voters. It's, oh, man, if your wages go up, I mean, we might have inflation. By the way, but you would also have higher wages, right? I mean, what an unbelievable excuse to work for big business and keep you down and oppress you. I don't want you to have higher wages, it might cause inflation. Well, how about when the executives had giant pay raises and giant bonuses? And how about when they did the stock buybacks and all those things? How about when the Fed printed all that money and gave it to all the companies? You weren't worried about inflation then. You guys authorized $2 trillion to go right in the beginning of the COVID relief thing, immediately to big business. And then the Fed authorized another $4 trillion. And you weren't worried about inflation with $6 trillion on the line. But now when the workers might get a $1 raise or a $2 raise per hour, you say, oh, now all of a sudden I'm worried about inflation. No, they're brazen, man, they're brazen. You vote for Ron Johnson, you're an idiot unless you're a billionaire or you run a giant corporation. He's telling you, I want your wages as to be as low as humanly possible so my big business friends can win. Now back to the details of that, right? So he says, I have faith in the markets. No, but wait a minute, guys. Markets are real and they do set prices, but they don't exist in a bubble, right? So it's the job of the government to hold corporations accountable. It's the job of corporations to maximize profits. If you let corporations set wages, they would set them at near starvation wages, right? They'd get it so that you could barely live, and then they would take all the profits on top, because it would keep their costs literally as low as humanly possible. Now, the government is supposed to step in and protect us in a democracy through different things like regulations. One of them is the minimum wage. One of them, by the way, is a 40-hour work week. Before, we didn't have a 40-hour work week. We didn't have weekends because we had no unions to protect us and we had no democracy to protect us, right? Now we do, or we used to, and now Ron Johnson and the corporate overlords have taken over again and say, no, you should not have any protections if you're an actual American worker, and you should like it. And so, let alone his views on women getting back to work. These guys are disgusting. And the only reason why anybody votes for them is that the press calls everything even and helps them lie to you guys.
Now, I also want to provide some data in regard to where American wages have been and compare wages and how they've fared with inflation, because inflation has continued for decades and decades and decades. The question is, have wages outpaced inflation? And spoiler alert, no. But before I get to that data, I want you to ask yourselves a question because I'd love an answer. What exactly are parents supposed to do with their children if they're not making enough money to afford childcare? What are they supposed to do? Leave them home alone? I would like all of these so-called pro-life Republicans to explain to me what parents are supposed to do with their children if they can't afford childcare in this country that provides no social safety net for parents who have young children. That's the question I want to ask. Now let me get to the data. There's been a lot of data on US wages and how they have not kept up with inflation. I'm gonna give you a few data points right now. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics generated compensation cost indices, total benefit costs for all civilian workers have risen an inflation adjusted 22.5% since 2001 when the data series began versus 5.3% for wage and salary costs. So it continues. This is from Pew Research. After adjusting for inflation, today's hourly wage has just about the same purchasing power as it did in 1978, following a long slide in the 1980s and early 1990s, and bumpy, inconsistent, that's important, inconsistent growth since then. That's when inequality really started to explode. In fact, in real terms, average hourly earnings, in real terms, average hourly earnings peaked more than 45 years ago. The $4.03 an hour rate recorded in January of 1973 had the same purchasing power that $23.63 would today. That's nowhere near what the federal minimum wage is. The current federal minimum wage is $7.25. Minimum wage jobs pay that amount. Nothing close to $23.68. This indicates that the hourly wage for minimum wage jobs has not in any way kept up with inflation. Let me give you more. This is from 2000 to 2013. The dark blue line shows how productivity has increased through the decade, but you also see that the hourly compensation has stagnated. So Americans are actually working much harder and receiving less compensation for the hard work that they're putting in. But you might be thinking, well, that's 2000 to 2013. I mean, do we have any evidence that that trend continued? Yeah, let me show you some data from 2019 that shows the same trend. This is from Bloomberg. They use data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, and it shows that pay hasn't kept pace. It's very easy to see, and it's easy to also witness for yourself out on the streets with so many Americans living in poverty or in RVs or giant encampments because they can't afford a home.
Yeah, so I want to give you guys some context. Those graphs that Anna just showed you, the divergence starts around 1978. I'll talk about it a lot in my book, justicescomingbook.com. You can pre-order there. And it's because of a couple of Supreme Court decisions that allowed corporations to give unlimited money to politicians. That happened well before Citizens United. And then you immediately see the divergence as they purchase all of our politicians and keep our wages low while productivity is high. The difference between 1978 and now in those charts is the difference between productivity and the wages is about $12 trillion. So they took $12 trillion of your productivity and gave it to the richest people in the country and the world instead of you. You earned it, but you didn't get it. But now Ron Johnson spits in your face and says, if we give you any, the inflation might go up. But as Anna showed you, it did go up. If our wages had kept up with inflation, instead of being $7.25 right now for minimum wage federally, it'd be over $23. $23. Now we're trying to get $15 and we can't get it. The 8 Democrats voted, that's too, and that's, by the way, that's $15 in 5 years, right? And even 8 Democrats joined with the Republicans go, no, my corporate backers say it's way too much. Well, it would have been 23. How about the inflation point that Ron Johnson made? Oh, no, we only use that to keep wages low. We never, ever talk about it when it would mean that wages would be higher. And finally, back to the original point about Ron Johnson, they asked him, hey, how is a woman supposed to go back to work if she's got kids and she needs money for childcare? His answer was basically, I don't give a damn, and I want to keep her wages as low as possible, and I don't want to give her daycare, and I don't want to give her unemployment.
But I want to force her to go to work, because that's what the point of that entire interview was. He's terrified that people are not going back to work because the unemployment benefits that they're receiving as a result of the coronavirus relief package is persuading them to stay home. So what he's doing, along with other Republicans like him, He's running interference on behalf of corporations who don't want to compete with the nickels and dimes that the federal government is offering to the American people who are experiencing hardship. They don't want to increase their wages. They don't want to compete, again, with the federal government's unemployment program, which is not in any way overly generous. So they get these Republicans and oftentimes corporate Democrats as well to run interference on their behalf because that's what they're paid to do, guys. That's what the campaign donations force them to do, persuade them to do. They don't represent you. Ron Johnson is not representing the best interests of constituents in Wisconsin. He couldn't care less. What he cares about is, of course, his own political career, which is, really dependent on the campaign donations from these corporations who don't want to pay you a fair wage, a living wage.
You vote for these big business Republicans, you're out of your mind, unless you run a giant business. Last word goes to our viewers because they made a bunch of good points. Jake Fisher says on YouTube Super Chat, as a single parent, what have I heard? What I have heard was, and always has been, get a better paying job. Like they just grow on trees or something. That's how cruel and heartless most politicians are, because they don't know anybody that doesn't have millions of dollars in savings. They're all millionaires. All they know is millionaires and billionaires. So they're like, oh, why don't you just get a higher paying job? Oh, I didn't think of that. Thanks for letting me know. And then lastly, YTP Renewed, also on YouTube Super Chat, said, businesses can't afford $15 an hour? Tell it to Denmark. It's a great point. You know how much an average McDonald's worker makes in Denmark? $23 an hour. Do you know how much more expensive their burgers are? About 70 cents more than on average American burger, okay? That in McDonald's, same thing. Okay, and that's I'm rounding up on the burger price. So, oh no, they can't do it. Oh wow, the burger costs $5.99 instead of $5.29. And they pay $23 a worker. But the most important part of it is, well, did McDonald's go bankrupt when they paid that much to the workers and the burger cost 70 cents more? No, they make a great profit in Denmark. Perfectly great company doing unbelievable profits in Denmark. They choose to continue to work there and choose to make tons of money in Denmark. It turns out you can pay your workers more, you just don't want to, and you got away with it because you bought all these corporate Republicans and corporate Democrats, and they sold out the American people on your behalf. That's the reality.
All right, we got to take a break, but when we come back, this incredible story published in Slate where journalists talk about their experience throughout the years attempting to cover the Israel and Palestine story fairly, and the unfortunate editing and censorship they had to deal with. Come right back, we'll share that story with you and more.
All right, so I want to let you guys know about a programming note. LGBTQ Pride Special. We're gonna have it as we do now annually, and I want you guys to check it out on June 1st. It's at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. It's on tyt.com/live, of course, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube as well. And we're gonna have John Iadarola, Adrian Lawrence, Jason Carter, Daniel Franzese, Plastic Mortar, Canelo Lopez, Odessa Kelly, Rhea Butcher, and so many others on, and it's gonna be an amazing program. So make sure you check it out on June 1st. All right, now let me go to your member comments. Someone who likes Bernie Sanders wrote in, I know that the minimum wage movement has been laser focused on $15 an hour, but the most important thing we should do is what they do in Europe, which is to tie the minimum wage to inflation so that minimum wage automatically increases as inflation increases. So 100% want to do that, and it's absolutely critical to any increase in the minimum wage. But the problem is we can't get any movement, no movement at all. And Biden, let's just, you guys, if you watch the show, you know the reality, as opposed to if you watch mainstream media, you get lied to. So Joe Biden is against raising the $15 minimum wage. He says he's in favor of it, but then he had Carper and Coons, the two Delaware senators, his top allies, vote against it in the Senate. So that's Biden saying, no, I'm not gonna do $15. I'm not gonna tie it to inflation. I'm not gonna do any of that stuff. And I'll get my idiot mainstream media reporters to transcribe what I say, which is that I'm in favor of it as I actively kill it. So that's the current status, and he's not gonna change it. Mickey C, the silver-haired dragon, says, don't forget that last week Biden announced that if you're offered a job, you must take it. It doesn't matter if it's only $7.25 an hour, and that won't pay your bills. He said, quote, you can't game the system. It looks like your big business donors are gaming the system. It looks like you're gaming the system by having Democrats vote against $15 minimum wage, and but all of our progressives in Washington are, yay, A+, FDR. I told you guys it wasn't real. Unfortunately, as usual, I was right. All right, now let's go to wonderful people who joined. Andrew Benepe, Sam Alzahar, Jessica Menchaca, and William Grace. You guys are amazing. Hit the join button below on YouTube. Appreciate it. Mr. Charles says, Casper's looking extra beautiful this Monday morning. She's our superhero. Cenk, isn't Anna the best? I don't know why you're forcing me to say it. It's kind of, but fine. Okay, she's a hero.
No, don't say that. Thank you.
All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Amazing stories coming up. So Anna, take it away.
All right. The ongoing violence in Gaza due to airstrikes by the Israelis has opened up a discussion about how journalists in the United States have historically covered the story. And some of you might have noticed that there's been a pretty significant change in journalists' willingness to really call out the aggression by the Israeli government. Whereas before, it seemed as though the number of casualties on the Palestinian side was somehow equal to the number of casualties on the Israeli side, even though the numbers did not bear that out. I mean, there was this effort to make it seem like both sides were equal in the level of aggression, both sides were equal in the number of casualties or the amount of violence. But this time something changed. And what was really interesting was the reaction by the public to news that the Associated Press had fired a Jewish journalist by the name of Emily Wilder because of her pro-Palestinian activism in the past, when she was in college. And now we're also hearing from some journalists who agreed to speak to Slate about their personal experiences reporting on the matter and the kind of censorship they had to deal with in the past. So let's start off with Omar, not his real name, but he worked for a major US newspaper. He spoke to Slate and shared some personal anecdotes. He said, I wrote a piece about the extraordinary number of people that were being killed in Gaza in 2014. It was ready to go. It had gone through so many edits, excruciating edits. And the holdup was they wanted me to find out exactly how many children were injured by Hamas rockets in Israel, and then get reporting on the psychological impact of that on Israeli children. Omar continues to say that it's this level of bending over backwards for some elusive concept of impartiality that is just so impractical and would never be applied to any story elsewhere in the organization. If a black man gets shot by police, we do not go out and try to track down how many white cops were assaulted by black men that same year or something like that. It's dispiriting and upsetting.
Can I just jump in for 1 second there, Anna? I think that's such an important point. So it's oftentimes the tone, and the other journalists quoted in this story talk about they would have all of their tone changed from this is what's actually happening to, but on the other hand, right? Now he's saying, look, when a policeman kills an unarmed black person, we don't go, but on the other hand, how about all the crimes of black people across America? Now the right wing does that, and it doesn't make sense because it's not in the context of that story. It's just an whataboutism to try to distract you from what actually happened, which was the crime of that unarmed black man being killed. And normally the New York Times and other outlets do not tolerate that because it gives a wrong, misleading impression of the context of that story, right? But when it comes to Israel, I mean, look at what they just explained there. When you're reporting the sheer massive number of Palestinian children killed, you must include not only the couple of Israeli children killed, sure, of course you should include that, that's also true, right? But it's in that war, it was about, I think 2 Israeli children were killed and about 1,400 Palestinian children were killed. But they say, but that's not enough. You must then include how psychologically damaged everyone in Israel was about the children. What can I include how psychologically damaged the 1,400 people were, their families were when their kids were killed? No. We have to even it out. But it's not even. It's 1,400 to 2. No, it doesn't matter. Shut up and even it out. Almost every reporter explains. A top editor eventually would come in and go, no, I don't want you to report the facts as you saw it, as the witnesses say it. I want you to go and change the tone, or I'll change it for you. And by the way, if you don't agree, you're a troublesome reporter.
No, you're a troublesome reporter. Maybe that's the type of communication coming from the editors. But it goes further than that in the general public. And I think that's part of what honestly persuades editors to do this censorious coverage of what's actually happening on the ground. In fact, Omar also shares that oftentimes they would get information from the Israeli Defense Forces, and it would need to be published unchallenged, even if the reporters on the ground had witnessed something that contradicted what the Israeli Defense Forces said. So Omar shared that as well. Now let's move on to a former New York Times journalist who goes by Layla. No one wanted to share their real names. I think you can kind of understand why. It's really difficult to get journalism jobs as it is. It's even harder when you're willing to call out your boss or your former bosses for this kind of behavior. Now Layla shares her own experiences by saying, when the big escalation happened in the summer of 2014 and they were massacring civilians in Gaza, the New York Times coverage, as usual, violated all the basic principles that they insist on sticking to for just about every other story. The thing that really killed me was this rocket tracker. And so at the time, the New York Times had a graphic heavy piece that specifically tracked Hamas and the rockets that it's firing. Now, that should be covered, but of course it needs to be covered in its proper context, right? Because obviously the defense and military capabilities of Hamas is very different from that of Israel. Israel has the Iron Dome. That's the reason why they're very luckily able to protect themselves from Hamas and its rockets. Gaza doesn't have that. Gaza has very little protection, which is why the casualties are much higher, including casualties among civilians, including children, right? So that kind of context oftentimes would be buried in the story or would be left out altogether, and that's what Layla is alluding to here. She also says, it was a depressive couple of weeks of crying in the restroom. I also had a close ally in the opinion department who was forwarding me all the responses those editors were having about pitches, and the sheer racism and dehumanization from rank and file opinion editors when talking about Palestinians was just jarring. And these are people in my union, people who were my coworkers. In fact, she was so bothered by this that she decided to raise her concerns with the top editors. One of those top editors was Susan Shira at the time, and she also raised these concerns to executive editor Dean Baquet, and she did not get the response that she was hoping for. She told Slate, quote, The line was basically, if we're being criticized by people who are pro-Israel and you're also complaining, then we're doing the right thing, which I think is a pretty weak response. And
it's a terrible response.
They repeated a very similar response to Slate when Slate asked them to comment about this interaction. So there's that. Not long after that interaction with the editors, Layla decided to quit her job at the New York Times. Now in 2015, Palestinian journalist, this is the one person who decided to go on the record with his name, Ahmed Shihab Eldin, was filming a documentary for Vice. He came upon a group of settlers destroying a Palestinian family's home in the Silwan neighborhood in East Jerusalem. After a mother who lived there came home with her young daughter, he watched as the settlers threw the young girl's toys out of the house, removing pipes and destroying furniture. So he talks about how that moment, especially for a documentary, is a big deal. You would want to include that in a documentary to give a fair and balanced view of what's happening on the ground. He says, we're filming and all of a sudden there's a torrential downpour and they're locked out of their home. Literally, if we had done all the planning with millions of dollars to try to capture the scene that unfolded in front of us that we captured by chance, we wouldn't have been able to do it. But Vice decided to cut that scene from the documentary, and he never got a good reason for why they decided to do that. So that's the kind of editing that takes place that is honestly really difficult for a journalist who cares about reporting the truth to stomach. And that's why you hear these stories about people walking away from their jobs, quitting, or in some cases, yes, they feel that they have to stomach it, they have to deal with it, because where else are they gonna go? Especially since most legacy media outlets had the same type of policy, right? It's an unspoken policy, but you can see where it's headed anytime you have any coverage that's a little more critical of the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Forces. Jane.
Okay, so in that same story where he gets this amazing footage of this family being abused, their house was not set for destruction, the settlers were destroying it anyway. They eventually gave him the excuse that we can't show the confrontation because it will make it show too much of one side's argument. But that's actually what happened. So you can't show the truth because it would show that one side is right and the other one is wrong. Now you guys aren't reporting. I mean, none of this. These are not real journalistic operations. This, at least on this issue, So, and everybody reports the same thing. Non-stop editors on this one issue. No, you can't. You can't report the truth because that'll make Israel look bad. Now, guys, I'm going to take a pause here because I got more devastating stuff. But I want you to understand something. It is because of the political correctness and the incredible power that politicians put on these journalistic outfits, okay? There's no cabal of secret people in charge. There's none of that, okay? But on this issue, it is politically a third rail in America. And it has been for a long, long time. So that's the context of it. But Morgan says, frankly, the issue here is, are Palestinians human? Are Arabs human? Are Muslims human? That's how basic it became. Now, look, they give Arab names to the Arab American reporters that are going anonymous in this story. Morgan apparently is not, and that's also a pseudonym. But here's a guy who is not ethnically linked apparently to either side, and he's saying, you're not even treating one side as human. This is unbelievable. And then he says, look, the good news is, and I've seen this too, and it's also reported in this Slate piece, that now the tide is beginning to change a little bit. And there's a couple of reasons why there's now more Arab Americans, Muslim Americans in newsrooms, and they're going, are we really gonna say that it's 1,400 to 2 is no big deal and report it as even? And by the way, the New York Times, terrible excuse for, well, hey, look, if both sides are angry, then I must be doing something right. Number one, we covered when Rush Limbaugh says that. No, that is not real journalism to say, I mangled it on both sides, or both sides are angry, right or wrong. What am I supposed to figure out if it's right or wrong? I'm just gonna put it right down the middle so everybody gets mad, and I don't care what the facts are because I'm trying to be politically correct. By the way, when you report that Joe Biden won the election, the other side gets super mad. Trump people get furious. How come you still report the facts on that one? Oh, all of a sudden you don't have to be right down the middle. No, you're not supposed to be down the middle politically. you're supposed to be objective about the facts, not neutral to the politics. And Morgan described what happened if you complain, and he explained there was, quote, many small and large negotiations with editors. The negotiations would be nonstops. And they say, you show, hey, a bomb hit a home and killed many civilians. That's the fact that I'm reporting on the ground, right? They'd say, no, you have to show us how tough you are on terrorists. Okay,
yeah,
so, and if you complain too much or you ask to actually put the facts in the story, they would say, according to him, that you were, quote, a frictional reporter. You're creating too much friction and won't just do as you're told.
And look, I think it's also important to hear from someone who is ethnically tied to this issue, right? And that's a Jewish progressive journalist in the United States, based in the United States, Peter Beinart. I'm sure you've seen him on Twitter if you're active on Twitter. He is one of the editors, actually the editor at large over at Jewish Currents. And so he shares his perspective, and I think it's super relevant to this story. He says, there's a whole carefully curated language around this conflict, where terms are often deployed in order to not provoke controversy or backlash. One of the things that I hope that will start to happen is that people will interrogate that language and ask, maybe this is the politically safe language, but is it actually true? He continues to say that even putting aside what happens in the West Bank or Gaza, where Palestinians aren't citizens at all and the state dominates their lives, it is very frightening that words like ethno-nationalism or Jewish supremacy or Jewish domination would be unsafe words for most mainstream newspapers to use, even though in a certain sense, they really shouldn't be controversial. That was the strongest statement that I've heard or read about this issue. And look, I also understand with the very real issue of anti-Semitism, why some outlets would be very careful in the way that they report these stories. But when you're going out of your way to essentially hide or bury the real story or the devastation that Palestinians are facing as a result of the aggression by the Israeli government, you're not ethically doing your job. The facts are the facts. You can't change the facts. You also can't omit facts in an effort to avoid backlash from people who don't want to hear them. Journalism is actually a very difficult job if you're willing to do it correctly. And yes, you're gonna get backlash. People are always gonna be unhappy with you. But you have to ask yourself whether you're in it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Right?
And so the voices like Beinart speaking out are so important. And now you've got, as we reported last week, wonderful Jewish senators leading the way in Congress saying maybe Israel shouldn't get the arms sales that we agreed to or Biden agreed to recently if they're gonna continue to occupy Palestine and bomb Palestinian civilians, led of course by Bernie Sanders, but other wonderful senators as well, Jewish and Christian alike, okay? And so, and that phenomenon of under 40-year-old Jewish Americans being very progressive and saying, no, of course Palestinians are human, just dehumanize them like this is ridiculous. When you say something should be a Jewish state and hence we must occupy. It's one thing to say this should be a Jewish state. It's another thing to say it's got to be a Jewish state. Hence, the Palestinians within Israel should have some lesser rights, and more importantly, the Palestinians that are occupied should be kept occupied for decades and decades, because basically, under the logic of they're too violent to govern themselves. And so I suspected that would rise up, and that those folks have risen up, and they're absolutely heroes, and they're making a giant difference. And so, just last couple of things here, because it's so important. They said the other problem is that it creates self-censorship. Every reporter, almost every reporter quoted on the piece says the same thing, which is, well, then you wonder, like, if I write it accurately, am I gonna get in trouble? Are they gonna think I'm a frictional reporter? All these things that happen. So sometimes you don't even bother writing it, even though it's obviously true.
Yep.
And so this is disgraceful. And here, I wanna give you one more quote here, because I think it's so important. We had another, this is from one of the anonymous reporters quoted. And then we had another tier of editors. They explained, first we had lower level editors were good. They actually cared about, hey, what's actually happening on the ground, etc. But when you got to the tier above them, he explains, we had another tier of editor above them who were more mindful of the tone of the media organization and dictated a lot of the tone. So that's not important just to the Israel story. That's important to everything we cover, guys. And we're about the only show that I've seen that explains and focuses on the tone of the pieces, because that is where they send you subliminal messages. And we oftentimes show you in the pieces, you see what they said about Medicare for all? Even though it's technically true that it costs $32 trillion, they left out that it saves $34 trillion. And then they frame it as this is something really expensive that we can't afford. But when we have tax cuts for the rich or endless wars, they never talk about the cost. Well, my God, the missing context and the tone actually told you more about the story than the so-called facts that they put into the story. And it's the selective editing that takes certain facts and highlights them and minimizes other facts. In this case, it's a matter of life and death because it minimizes the Palestinian civilian deaths and maximizes what they say comes directly from right-wing Israeli government sources. And other reporters explain again here, if Mossad said it, or not Mossad, sorry, Israeli Defense Forces said it, we would write it as it was fact. We were not really allowed to question it. It was an official source. But if we saw it with our own eyes or we got an eyewitness, they would say it's unreliable.
It's so crazy.
That's unbelievable.
And by the way, like think about that in any other context, right? A military source, I don't care if it's the Israeli military, I don't care if it's the US military, I don't care if it's the military in Zimbabwe, I don't care. It is, you should not consider that an official source that you can't question as a journalist. That is insane thinking. That is not journalistic, that is not ethical. The fact that they would ever refer to a military source as a source that cannot be questioned is crazy.
And I'm gonna say one last thing here, because guys, this story is much larger than just Israel, even though that's a huge story in and of itself. Because they actually did used to do that here in America until very, very recently, and we're still trying to get past it now, on the issue of police violence towards minorities in this country. They would say the police reporting something, every local news outlet would say that is an official source and you must write it exactly as the police say it. And questioning it is very controversial. Like, you need overwhelming evidence to question an official statement by the police, right? But if you have a witness, an African-American witness, before the days of the body cam footage and the iPhone footage, they'd be like, unreliable, don't print it, don't print it. Or if you do, say, well, you have to heavily discount it. And what does that create? It creates state-run media, de facto. Subliminally, they tell you the state is always right, even if the state is doing violence on its own citizens or other citizens. And if the citizens protest against that violence, they are not to be trusted. And that is poison inside the American media and destroys journalism. And that's the reality, unfortunately, of corporate media in this country and the skewed perspective that it has created.
When we come back from the break, I'm gonna show you that Liz Cheney is still Liz Cheney. Don't be fooled, she's a Cheney. We got that story and more when we come back.
All right, back during the break here. First, let me go to YouTube. Topguz 1297 just joined. I assume that's a Turkish name. I have no idea if it actually is. Anyway, hit the join button below. At the Essentials level, you get the bonus episode. We got hilarious Meghan McCain shenanigans in the post game today. We'll straighten her out. That's for the members. By the way, at the premium level, you get old school's bonus episode and the bonus episode of all of the shows. All right, Kaylee O'Hara writes in on Super Chat, frictional reporter is the new suppressive person. Interesting point. Forrest Dudley writes in, what is the time frame / deadline for the Twitch pitch submission? Is there a hard deadline or will it be an ongoing program? P.S. Woke up super late and tired today. Thank God for Too Strong Coffee. I love that. There you go. Love both things. Okay, twostrongcoffee.com/TYT. That's how you get this delicious coffee. The kids are calling it delish. I'll roll with that. And now I have my coffee without cream. I've never had it without cream my whole life, but this coffee is so delicious I don't need cream for it.
Let me see that.
No, this one's water. I was just playing, okay? I had coffee from earlier. I had a lot of coffee today because I didn't get enough sleep. Anyway, thank you for that shout out. But in terms of the Twitch pitch, I love that you care about that. We're trying to create new hosts from you guys. When is the deadline? I'm not sure. Go to tyt.com/Twitch pitch. I don't think you have to do it today. I don't think the deadline's anywhere near now. But a lot of people are starting to sending it in because that gives you the guidelines for how to send in your video, tyt.com/Twitch pitch. Please do that, okay? Steven says, please send a reporter challenge as White House reporters. We're working on it, brother. We're working on it. We're working with another publication and we might have a White House correspondent. As with all things, it's all about how much resources do we have. And so that's why we ask you to join and become members, because then the more resources we have, the more we could do things like that. And having a White House correspondent would be amazing. 0083 writes in, Cenk, I love you, man. Right back at you, Zero. Anyway, but are you really gonna finish this book? Come on, you can tell me. No one will know. Okay.
Dude, writing a book is like just pure torture, unless you're already rich and famous and then someone writes it for you. Like, that's why I haven't written one. I don't have time to go back and forth with some literary agent who like can't make up his or her mind about what the edits need to be. Just give me the edits one time. I'll do the edits and let's move on. Let's move on. What is wrong with you people?
Apparently Casper had an experience. I think I'm close to done with it. JusticeIsComingBook.com, JusticeIsComingBook.com. I've got a way to wrap it up, so I want to do that. You're gonna love it, it's gonna be amazing. I promise you, I've already written most of it. We'll be back. Back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you, Casper.
All right. Representative Liz Cheney was finally asked something that I've been curious about, which is, while she has protested her own party and their willingness to enable Donald Trump's lies about the 2020 election, she's been part and parcel of a Republican Party that has spread all sorts of lies and talking points about voter fraud that just simply has not existed. And of course, they've done that in an effort to sell these voting suppression bills to the American people. Now, she was asked about that connection during an interview with Axios. Let's hear what she has to say.
You don't see any linkage between Donald Trump saying the election's stolen and then Republicans in all of these state legislatures rushing to put in place these restrictive voter laws?
Well, I think you have to look at the specifics of each one of those efforts. I think if you look at the Georgia laws, for example, there's been a lot that's been said nationally about the Georgia voter laws that turns out not to be true.
But even the Republican Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, said that when this bill started to pick up momentum was when Rudy Giuliani was testifying that the Georgia election was a sham. I don't think anyone doubts that the reason 400 some voting bills have been introduced, 90% by Republicans, supported by the Republican National Committee. I don't think it's a coincidence after the election that this has happened.
Look, I think everybody should want a situation and a system where people who ought to be able to vote and have the right to vote can vote, and people who don't shouldn't.
Yeah, that's not really an answer. And let's be clear, the Republican Party for years, through its well-oiled machine of politicians spouting talking points, which are then covered by right-wing media, have primed the electorate to believe, without any evidence, that widespread voter fraud has been a big problem. So this actually started before Trump, and Trump decided to do what he does best, exploit the opportunity for his own political advancement. And so for her to pretend, first of all, she didn't even answer the question there. We have a second video we'll get to in just a second. But her non-answer there, in my opinion, is telling. Her unwillingness to take responsibility for what she's created, the monster that she's created, says a lot about who she is.
100%. So in fact, the US Attorney scandal happened during the Bush-Cheney years, if you remember. And what was that scandal? That was when the administration was making the US attorneys look into voter fraud cases that weren't there. And the US attorneys would report back, even though they were political appointments and they were Republicans in general, they would report back saying, we looked, there was no voter fraud. And they said, do it again. Or they intimated they would be punished if they didn't find voter fraud. And it was all a politically manufactured event to create a fake scandal about voter fraud so they could limit voting. So that was a giant scandal, and it happened during George W. Bush and Dick Cheney's term. So I mean, look, the fraud goes all the way back to 1980. We've shown you that clip a lot on the Young Turks. So Paul Weyrich, who set up a couple of the huge right-wing organizations like ALEC and Heritage Foundation and Moral Majority, he said, we honestly don't want more people voting. We want less people voting in order for Republicans to win. And the Republican Party has been trying to limit voting ever since. And so, and this is not new to American politics overall. Obviously, Jim Crow laws were meant to make sure that black people in the South couldn't vote. And by the way, how did they do that? Things like you have to get an ID. The ID costs money. And even if the ID doesn't cost money in the new days, because they know, hey, that old trick is known to be racist. Well, it's gonna cost a lot of time and effort, right? You might have to take a day off from work to go in and get it, etc. And so we know it's gonna be really hard for you to get it if you live in a city, you're poor, you're a student, all the reasons you wouldn't have a car, right? And those tend to be more Democratic voters. So Liz Cheney knows that her party started this cancer, and her dad was a huge part of starting this cancer in American democracy in the first place. Now she's outraged to find out gambling in this establishment, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden she's like, oh, now Republicans are lying about voter fraud in order to try to steal an election? Well, golly gee, I've never seen it. I'm glad she's came to the party, but she is awfully late.
Also, I think that she's clearly made a political calculation, because I'm not kind enough to Republican lawmakers to believe that she had this moral awakening in regard to Donald Trump. I think that she has decided that the right political calculation is to brand herself as this courageous right-winger who's willing to speak truth to power, when again, she's had absolutely no problem with honestly stolen elections in the past, elections that were stolen by, maybe people like her dad who was on the ticket in 2000. In fact, she touches on that. Let's go to the next video.
But what problem are they solving for? Like, there's not like, what are all these states doing?
No, I think, well, each state is different.
What was the big problem in Georgia that needed to be solved by a new law? What was the big problem in Texas? What was the big problem in Florida? What was these laws are coming all around the states, and like, what are they solving for?
I think you've got to look at each individual state law. But I think what we can all agree on.
You can't divorce them from the context.
Well,
come on.
Yeah, but I think what we can agree on is that what is happening right now is really dangerous.
So she says what's happening right now is really dangerous. And then later she continues to say that when the election in 2000 was contested, that Al Gore did the right thing. Al Gore did the right thing by finally conceding, even though we all know what went down in Florida during that presidential election. So what she's saying is, Trump is unwilling to do the right thing here by conceding, even though Trump rightfully lost the election. He I mean, took this battle to court dozens and dozens of times, over 60 times, I believe, and his lawyers failed to provide a single shred of evidence indicating there was widespread voter fraud. The Republican Party has gone out of its way for a very long time now to disenfranchise voters, to suppress voters, and she has to take responsibility for that. The fact that she's not taking responsibility for that, to me, proves that what she's engaging in right now by speaking out against Donald Trump is nothing more than a political calculation to further her own political career. I know that sounds crazy considering she's faced some ramifications as a result of her willingness to speak out against Donald Trump, but I really think that this is the way that she wants to brand herself in the Republican Party.
100%. Look, the Bush and Cheney folks caught feelings too. Because Trump kept attacking Bush over and over again. Sometimes he'd attack Dick Cheney. So a part of it is personal. But the other part is, Anna's absolutely right. Liz Cheney's thinking long term. She's thinking, look, at some point, the Republican Party might turn. And if it turns, they're gonna look for the loudest voice that was opposed to Trump. Well, now that's gonna be me. It's not gonna be Jeff Flake. It's not gonna be Ben Sasse. It's not gonna be any of those folks. It's gonna be me. And that's a good calculation. So it's unlikely that the Republican Party will turn against Trump, but if they do, then she's sitting pretty politically. Now, last piece of hypocrisy here. If they counted all the votes in Florida, the entire state of Florida, all the media organizations after the election got together, got all the votes under Chads, over Chads, whatever, all those different things that were hanging Chads, all the different ways of measuring who won. And it turns out Al Gore had won the Electoral College as well as the popular vote, okay? So Bush and Cheney did steal an election. And what she's saying here is not don't steal an election. She's saying don't be a schmuck in how you steal an election.
Right.
We did it right, you're doing it wrong.
Totally. All right, well, let's go to the great state of Texas and see what they're up to. Nothing good, unfortunately. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is set to sign new legislation that the legislators in the state have agreed to, and it would allow for gun carriers to carry handguns without a permit. This comes during the same weekend, by the way, where gun violence has exploded in the country. CNN reported that there were as many as 12 mass shootings over this past weekend alone. We'll get to those details in just a moment, but before I do so, let me go ahead and tell you more about House Bill 1927, which would eliminate the requirement for Texas residents to obtain a license to carry handguns if they're not barred by state or federal law from possessing a gun. Now, to some, that might seem like it's not unreasonable, except there are all sorts of loopholes to the federal background check, which we've covered in great detail. The federal background check does not apply to the sale of guns by private sellers. There's the gun show loophole, where someone who might have a criminal record or someone who has no business buying a gun is easily able to buy as many guns as he or she wants. You guys get the picture. So with all of these flaws in our gun laws already, loosening up whatever existing laws there are in Texas doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but I'll give you more. So before approving the bill, the Senate did tack on several amendments to address concerns by law enforcement, because there are certain law enforcement departments who are concerned about loosened gun laws. It could affect them negatively, right? So what were those amendments? The final version of the bill keeps intact a number of changes that the Senate made to the House bill to assuage concerns from law enforcement community, including striking a provision that would have barred cops from questioning someone based on their possession of a handgun. I mean, cops are gonna wanna harass certain people if they have a handgun, right?
Of course. So let's keep it real here, right? And so some right wingers might say it's too cynical. I don't really care what they say. So let's
no,
just move
it's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Considering how cops react to a black individual with a gun, oftentimes with a licensed gun, as was the case with Philando Castile, and the way they react to a white person like Kyle Rittenhouse, who literally had an illegal gun.
Yeah. So the changes that they made to the law that held it up for a hot minute was online safety course. Who cares? It's not at all controversial. Increasing the penalty for felons having a weapon, Okay, that's not gonna be that controversial in Texas, right? People are gonna generally agree to that. But the one that they cared the most about was the cops must be able to question the person with the gun. And our sense of it is that they probably got together and were like, guys, you think we're gonna question white people with guns? Of course not, those are good abiding American citizens, right? But imagine if there's a black guy with a gun and we can't ask him why he has it. Hair on fire, they're like, okay, we gotta change the bill, we gotta. But now in Texas, we don't know, right? But I'm telling you, my guess is, having seen this many times, that they probably had a conversation. Now imagine someone who looks Mexican and he's carrying around weapons. What, the cops aren't allowed to ask him why he has the weapons? They're like, oh, change it right away. Cops can ask, cops can ask. And you know how they're gonna selectively enforce. We've seen it a million times all across America. They're not gonna ask the white guy with an AR-15 walking around Walmart. We literally showed you the pictures. They walk around without a care in the world. And what did they do to John Crawford in Ohio when he had a BB gun that he was gonna buy from Walmart that he picked up at the store? They shot him in 2 seconds flat and killed him. So, look, I hope they ask in Texas when it comes to a black person or a Latino person, because most of the time, the way that it actually works is what Anna told you about Philando Castile. White guy has a gun, points it at officers, the Bundy guys, said threatens to kill the officers. We have a party with them and we, eat crumpets, etc. In January 6th, they raid the Capitol and they viciously attack police. Nobody gets shot. Except one person finally got shot when they were finally crossing the place where they could actually get to and murder the legislators, right? But before that, the cops are just viciously assaulted and nobody gets touched. But Tamir Rice, 12-year-old black boy, I can go on, I can give you dozens and dozens and dozens of cases where it was a toy gun, a BB gun, no gun at all, it was a phone, etc. They didn't ask, they just shot and killed the black guy. So that's the reality of America. And in Texas, I guarantee you they don't ask white people in general, but they will ask almost every black and Latino person, why do you have that gun?
And this is just, this particular piece of legislation in the state of Texas is so gratuitous. It's so unnecessary considering how easy it is for Texans to access guns, to purchase guns. This is just needlessly provocative, gratuitous, you get my point. And when you look at what's happened over the weekend, are we ever gonna get to a sane place in this country in regard to gun violence, in regard to closing the loopholes when it comes to federal background checks, just common sense gun legislation? And by the way, I say this as someone who, believe it or not, despite covering these types of stories for years now, I've warmed up to gun rights, right? But not to the point where I want to get rid of all laws and regulations and just let guns run amok. No, I think that people who are law-abiding citizens, who have proven themselves to be responsible human beings should have the ability to access a gun for hunting, for going to the gun range, for whatever they think that they need the gun for. But we don't have that system in place right now, and it's far too easy for bad guys to get guns, not because we have too many gun laws, but because we have insanely weak and lax gun laws. And it bears it out in the numbers of mass shootings and gun violence, which over this past weekend really did explode. There were at least 12 mass shootings between Friday night and Saturday and Sunday, according to an analysis of data from the Gun Violence Archive. The shootings took place across 8 states: Illinois, New Jersey, Ohio, Indiana, South Carolina, Virginia, Texas, and Minnesota. So far this year, more than 7,500 people have died from gun violence across the United States. Guys, we're not even done with May yet. And that's according to the same source, Gun Violence Archive. There's also been a 23% uptick in deaths from gun violence this year.
So mass shooting is when 4 people are shot, either wounded or killed. So 12 of them, including one in Texas, obviously, 80 people injured, 11 killed, right, overall. And it's not even news. Is it major news? Did you hear about the 12 massacres that happened in America this weekend? You didn't hear about it because it's normal now. It would be, if we had no massacres this weekend, that would be breaking news. Oh my God, we went a whole weekend in America without a mass shooting. A shocking development. And in Texas, where they had some of the worst mass shootings in American history, they're now saying, we have too many gun laws. We should let everybody run amok. Okay, who cares if you're licensed, not licensed? You gonna get a car? You need a license. You gonna vote? Oh, well, we need tons and tons of voter ID and make sure that you're doing it right. Oh, you're gonna take a gun that could kill anybody at any moment? Who cares? Do anything you want. Yeah. So look, their hypocrisy is super obvious. They don't care about the massacres. They've done nothing about the massacres. You're voting for Republicans. Honestly, you're voting for massacres. And I don't share Anna's opinion. I'm not warmed up to any goddamn gun rights, okay? That doesn't mean I'm in favor of taking away everybody's guns, but I think we need to get 1,000 times stricter because this country's nuts. No other country has massacres like us nonstop. It's total insanity. So I would make gun laws way more restrictive than they are now. If you want to cry about that, oh, I got a hobby, man. And my hobby murders people every weekend. Oh, so what? Oh, 7,500 people died because of my hobby. You got a hobby, fantasy football, waste a little time. My hobby murders people. Well, what are we gonna do? Oh, you don't take my freedom away. Well, I don't agree.
All right, we gotta take a break, but when we come back for the second hour, interesting update to the story involving Jeffrey Epstein's suicide. You do not want to miss the details on that and more when we return.
Came in late to watch TYT Old School and I hear Cenk Uygur talking about napkins. Is this the kind of nonsense Anna Kasparian was talking about? Gotta love membership privileges. Gotta love it.
Please have Dave on every 4 episodes or so.
Watching Ben Mankiewicz and Cenk Uygur on Old School talking is exactly like watching Seinfeld and George. I'm not sure if that's a compliment.
Who's on Old School today? Is there one? At Dave Kohler. I hope it's not Brett Ehrlich.
This episode of Old School has killed me. Who knew a conversation about good and bad underwear could be so hilarious and relatable?
Couple things about this video. Dave Kohler looks so badass.
There's more than a 73% chance this Old School will be really funny. Cenk Uygur has been up since 4 a.m. so he's tired, hence everything will seem funnier to him. P.S. Remember, food talk, new words, and no or very little politics.
Dave Kohler, enjoyed performance on Old School. Can we please hear about your time as a geologist? One geologist to another?
I appreciate that all these people enjoy it because I know Cenk loves to do it and he does it because he knows the fans love it too.
This looks like a conspiracy. This looks like a scheme to defraud.
The Bush administration put folks into the regulatory agencies who believed in destroying regulations.
Memories of the Great Depression faded. They stood on the floor of the Senate day after day attacking what they were trying to do.
They just generated all this junk, took home huge bonuses, and then when it collapsed, they said, oh, not us.
What they ginned up was pure extortion, putting a gun to the head of Congress.
Time and again, they heard the devastation that was happening in low and moderate income communities caused by bankers, by lenders, and they chose to ignore it.
I understood that the SEC was not merely a weakened version of what it was supposed to be. It was an agent of Wall Street.
When no one's enforcing the law, the criminals take over.
I'll continue to sit. I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed.
The president labeled him a son of a bitch.
I don't think it's good to be a distraction to your team.
To stand proudly for the national anthem.
You know, some of these people need to move to another country.
Well, you shouldn't be playing. You shouldn't be there. Maybe you shouldn't be in the country.
The president is put in place to amplify the racists in this country. Black men and boys are killed at an exponentially higher rate than white men and boys, as outlined by PBS. Black people are most likely to be killed by police, found mappingpoliceviolence.org. Personally, my biggest gripe is not saying how sports and politics have been attached at the hip. From the jockey syndrome, to the Negro Leagues, to Tommy Smith and John Carlos, Muhammad Ali, to modern day and everything in between. This is not an escape. It is a reflection of reality and a reflection of the times.
On the White House lawn, would that
I'm Mike Shekels, and I'm the Director of Technical Operations. So if you're frantically tweeting at us that something's broken, thank you, because I'm fixing it. This here is Johnny Greenwald.
I'm Manager of Post-Production Technology. Simplest terms is I deliver the content.
And this is our master control room. We have many, many more destinations than ever before, and we created this room to consolidate it, to make sure that everything's going out is up to standard, so we meet all of our contractual agreements.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. But you guys know that because of the comments I'm about to read, as usual, about Anna. But hold, first, these are the folks that just signed up and became American heroes by hitting that join button below on YouTube. Mama Bear Dragon, Dennis Hedgepeth, Brandon Barnett, Brittany Atwood, Jacob Torres, Brother Monk. You're all here. All my rowdy friends are here on a Monday night. Okay. So I'm going to Twitch. Chomp Suey says, gave 1,000 bits, which is amazing. Thank you, makes a big difference. Says, let's go for the Salt Dragon, okay? And then Lessa A. Sweat writes in on YouTube Super Chat and gave a good amount, so thank you. And just said, love you guys. And then gave another good amount to come back to say, I love you, goddess, best host ever.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It's super sweet and makes me kind of embarrassed, but thank you.
Yeah,
like, a little shy, but thank you.
Just for the record, it would not make me feel embarrassed. We were like at a 28-to-1 ratio at this point, but whatever. Okay, I'm also here. All right, back to the goddess.
Okay, no.
Okay, their words.
Cenk got in this habit of like, half ironically, but kind of not calling me queen because I like run the main show.
/ queen of the internet.
And I hate it. Like, I hate it so much. Don't ever call me queen.
I hear you.
No. But I do like Salt Dragon. Let's stick to that. Or my favorite is when you just call me Casper.
I hear you.
It's a good nickname, you know?
Okay.
Anyway, all right.
Moving forward, Salt.
Let's get to.
She's even salty about compliments.
Okay, all right.
All right, we're forward.
So, the two prison guards who were supposed to be watching over Jeffrey Epstein the day that he hanged himself have now admitted that they falsified records from that night. But as part of a plea deal, they are unlikely to face any time in jail. This story is out of control, and it still continues to raise questions about what really happened on the night that Jeffrey Epstein died. Now, let me give you the details on what we know about the trial, what this plea deal is, and then we can talk about our own analysis on this. As Slate reports, the two Bureau of Prisons employees, Michael Thomas and Tova Knoll, had been charged with ignoring their duties and lying about it. Specifically, prosecutors accused them of napping and browsing the internet rather than checking on Epstein every 30 minutes like they were supposed to on the night he was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell. So they weren't watching over him, and apparently in order to avoid getting in trouble, they falsified records to make it appear as though they had been checking on him. The two guards had been charged with lying on prison records to make it seem as though they had made the necessary checks on Epstein before he was found dead. They had pleaded not guilty to making false records and conspiracy to defraud the United States, but now they admitted to having, quote, willfully and knowingly completed materially false records regarding their rounds. So it's important to note that their change in plea needs to be accepted by the judge. And if the judge accepts it, it is unlikely as part of the plea deal that they will serve any time behind bars. Now, that is an interesting question on its own that maybe we should talk about right now if you're open to it, Cenk. But also, it still continues to raise questions in my mind about what happened that night, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Cenk, if they falsified records, As part of this plea deal, do you think it makes sense for them to avoid any time behind bars?
It 100% depends on the context. So if we're talking about a rando case, turns out that their excuses, one of them was napping and the other one was checking sports scores and buying furniture online, okay? When I first heard the guards were conveniently off duty, I thought, man, they better have a good excuse. Then I realized as they came up with this weak sauce excuse, they actually didn't need one at all, because napping sounds believable, shopping online sounds believable, checking sports scores sounds super believable, all of it. And why does it sound believable? Because most of the time, when things go wrong at work, it's laziness, right? And so would you be shocked to find out that some guards were lazy? And let's say that nothing went wrong that day and they falsified records, should they go to prison? Well, it sounds pretty harsh to send them to prison for falsifying records. There should definitely be consequences at work, you know, et cetera. But if the most important prisoner in the country hung himself because you were snoozing or whatever, and then you falsified records, yeah, there should be huge criminal responsibility. One, why? It had a huge impact what you did. Two, this was not a normal situation. You were supposed to be incredibly vigilant here. And then number three, honestly, so you can get them to flip. If you say to them, oh, slap on the wrist, you don't have to worry about it. Well, the next time somebody's guarding Ghislaine Maxwell, his co-conspirator who's currently in prison, they could say, somebody offers me, I don't know, make up a number. We don't know, obviously this is the speculation part. Somebody offers me $1 million and I could be set for life, or 2 million or whatever the number is. And I just have to pretend I was napping, and then they let me off. There's no criminal offense at all. Oh, I might have trouble at work. Who cares? I just got a couple of $1 million. Then of course every guard can be bribed super easy. That's why it's a criminal offense.
Yeah, and remember, they initially pled not guilty, and then they decided to change it based on this plea agreement. You know, sometimes individuals will agree to a plea or a plea agreement because they're worried that they're gonna deal with an unfair case or they're gonna be found guilty anyway. I don't know what their motivating factors were, but I do also think it's important to mention that their defense attorney has cited the fact that they had been on multiple long shifts without any breaks. This particular correctional facility has been understaffed, chronically understaffed for a while. And so I looked into that, and that's actually true. So the napping at work doesn't appear to be lazy officers not doing their jobs. It seems like they were overworked and as a result fell asleep on the job. But anyway.
No, we don't know that. I mean, I have no idea what their motivation is. They might be 100% telling the truth. They might be 100% lying. I have no idea. Were they overworked? Sure. Is that a good enough excuse for, oh, there's the guy who has information on all the most powerful men in the world who, theoretically had suicidal thoughts before. So what? I'll take a nap. No, obviously you should be fired, and yes, in this case, I think there should be criminal consequences.
Okay, so now let's get to some of the things that have continued to raise questions in my mind. So this was honestly a mix of awful either mistakes, I don't know if they were intentional, obviously I don't want to speculate, but there were multiple things that happened that night that led to Jeffrey Epstein doing what he did, taking his own life, okay? So Epstein was left without a cellmate, for instance, even though he had made a suicide attempt 3 weeks earlier. On the night that he had hanged himself, he had been taken off suicide watch, which I think is strange, especially when
Very strange.
Very strange, and then here's the other thing. So the New York Times reports that security cameras did not show anyone entering the cell block where he was housed. The indictment said, suggesting that despite the conjecture and conspiracy theories swirling around him and his connections to powerful people, his death was a suicide, as New York City's chief medical examiner had ruled. But I thought that was a strange excerpt in that New York Times piece. And so I could recall that there were actually issues with the security cameras. And I wanted to check in on that and see what really happened. And yeah, 2 cameras that malfunctioned outside the jail cell where financier Jeffrey Epstein died. The 2 cameras were within view of the Manhattan jail cell where he was found dead on August 10th, 2019. He had been taken off suicide watch prior to his death. So what happened to the cameras, right? Yeah. Well, as Reuters, Mark Hosenball over at Reuters reported, the cameras were sent to Quantico, Virginia, the site of a major FBI crime lab where agents and forensic scientists analyze evidence.
So Anna, when I read a good article, I immediately go to see who wrote it. And I was so unsurprised to find out this was Mark Hosenball. He's one of the best reporters in the country, very quiet, understated guy. We used to interview him all the time back when he worked at Newsweek. He's just a no-nonsense, straight reporter, right? And so he has the actual news at Reuters, which is the 2 cameras that looked at Epstein's jail cell happened to malfunction. Oh, hell no. And guys, I have great credibility on this because on the day that he died, I said to you guys, if the cameras by his cell worked, then it was likely a suicide. If magically they happened to malfunction, then they killed him. And we found out later, oh, well, you look at that, golly gee, the 2 cameras right by his jail cell both malfunctioned. The 2 guards who were supposed to look at him both happened to fall asleep or be looking at the internet.
Could it just be a crazy coincidence that they didn't give him a cellmate, that the 2 guards who were meant to check in on him just fell asleep on the job and didn't do their job, and that the 2 cameras facing his cell just happened to malfunction? Maybe it's just a crazy coincidence.
Right, but our whole lives we've been told by places like the New York Times, ignore your lying eyes and believe the government. I mean, look at the way the New York Times framed that story. They didn't tell you about the 2 video cameras that looked at his cell malfunctioning. They told you about some other faraway cameras that were not malfunctioning. Why did they frame it that way? Why did Reuters have the real story and the New York Times had a weird cover up? And I don't think that the New York Times is in on it and that there's some sort of conspiracy that involves the reporter, the editor, et cetera. No, it's their frame of mind. Whatever the official government story is, it is very likely to be right. I bow my head, right? And that's what the New York Times does all the time. That's why I respect Mark Hosenball for writing a very normal, straight, factual story. So anyways, look guys, that is a hell of a series of coincidences. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. Do I know for sure? I don't know, I wasn't in the cell, right? And so he apparently tried to commit suicide 3 weeks before that. If that's true, I don't know if that's true either, but if that's true, well, okay, then maybe he tried a second time because he had an opportunity because the guards weren't there, et cetera, et cetera. But if I was investigators, the number 1 person I would look at is who made the decision to remove his cellmate, right? And take him off the suicide list, okay? Because whoever made that decision is higher up than the guards. And that is a very, very questionable decision. I would look at the chain of command of those video cameras and did anyone repair them before they malfunctioned? And so if it sounds like I'm not believing the official government story, yes, it's true, I am not believing the official government story. And if you just believe it because the government said it, you're not a real reporter. It doesn't mean the other side is true. It means we certainly don't know what happened. And it looks as deeply suspicious as any case I've ever seen. And it's about the guy who knew some of the most powerful men in the world were child molesters. So now we're all supposed to go, no, bow your heads. I don't accept the official story. It sounds ridiculous. And is the FBI going to actually look at the camera and figure out what happened and come back with the real story? Maybe, but oftentimes it doesn't turn out that way. And if I was Ghislaine Maxwell, his co-conspirator that's sitting in prison right now, I'd be the most nervous person on the planet. You better hurry up and tell people what you know already, because magically your cameras and your guards and your cellmates can disappear overnight as well.
All right, when we come back, we'll talk about how Amazon is now doing forced meditation for its workers. Aren't they so nice?
All right, I got two great pieces of news about Aspiration. One, TYT and Aspiration are doing this cool giveaway. It's affected me too because you can get in. It's $500 gift cards. There's no joke, and it's people that are in the Conscious Coalition. Those are good guy companies that actually care about the world. Find out more at tyt.com/win, and it's going to go to 10 Aspiration account holders, and you can enter by starting an Aspiration account. You can go to Aspiration Plus. You'll find out all about it at tyt.com/win. But one of it is if you use your debit card 10 times in between like mid-May and mid-June, and I have an Aspiration debit card, and I don't know if I qualify or not, but I wanted to get Warby Parker glasses, so I'm like, swipe, swipe. Wherever I go, I'm swiping.
Are you kidding me? That's like the easiest way to enter to win. Like you must spend money.
Yeah, well, you spend it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
look at you wanting to be hip with your Warby Parker sunglasses.
It's not a big deal.
Or eyeglasses.
Eyeglasses, not sunglasses.
Yeah.
But they got Reformation. They got a bunch of great companies in there. Believe it or not, there are good companies in the world now. Speaking of which, well, you know what Aspiration announced today? For their own workers, minimum wage is now $25 an hour.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What I tell you? I told you, didn't I? So you can always go to aspiration.com/TYT to sign up. And for this particular campaign, you can go to tyt.com/win to find out more. Okay, now I gotta go here. This is fun. Lessa A. Sweat then wrote back in, love you all, and Goddess Mod 2, mostly goddesses LOL. But still, Anna and Cenk, love you all, it's all good. So she might not have even been referring to Anna, but we'll take it.
Oh, damn.
I might have been for the mod.
Love it.
The mods are great. We have awesome mods everywhere. Joel Kraft wrote in, Cenk, you're loved too. No, stop it. As the wrestlers used to do. Anyway, Stephen writes in, Cenk, you go girl, true goddess, amen. I'm here for it, okay?
While you pick your next comment, I do want to plug the post game, which is going to be bananas today. Yes, we have a fun Meghan McCain story, but I also want to talk about something creepy I did that I didn't realize was creepy at the time, but then it kept me up all night last night once I realized it was creepy as I was trying to fall asleep.
Oh my God, the Instagram story I have on Old School, also about being creepy.
Dude.
You got to do tyt.com/join. That's where the bonus episodes are. Hit the join button below on YouTube, and you know how to do it on Amazon. You do it through tyt.com/prime. It's free for you on Twitch, so. All right, back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, and the news. Forward. This sounds like a band.
Well, you know, Amazon has been dealing with quite a bit of negative press, especially after it was discovered that their drivers are reduced to urinating in water bottles and literally defecating in bags because their workload is so intense, so extreme that they can't take bathroom breaks. Amazon even admitted to that. So in an effort to avoid bad press, maybe put out some positive PR, they're forcing their warehouse workers to do meditation. Because nothing makes you feel like a valued employee like your boss coercing you into meditation. Now, this is a new program that they've launched called Amazen, and it guides employees through mindfulness practices in individual interactive kiosks at buildings. During shifts, employees can visit Amazen stations and watch short videos featuring easy to follow well-being activities, including guided meditations, positive affirmations, calming scenes with sounds, and more. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but my understanding is that the employees don't want to be hounded with time off task nonsense that prevents them from doing something as simple as use the bathroom. How about that? It's very easy, right? But no, there's really no talk about Amazon changing their policies on time off task. But let me give you more. Workers will also get hourly prompts. This is the part like I want to pull my hair out, guys. Workers will also get hourly prompts at their workstations, guiding them through a series of scientifically proven physical and mental activities to help recharge and re-energize, and ultimately reduce their risk of injury. These prompts, called mind and body moments, can include stretching recommendations, breathing exercises, and mental reflections. And Amazon says the program will evolve to serve more personalized prompts to workers. So every hour, your employer, Amazon, is reminding you that you need to get your ass up and stretch, because they don't want you to get injured on the job. That'll cost them money, and they don't want to deal with that. That's what this really is. Like, the fact that they're trying to paint this as like, no, we're like super zen and we're totally looking out for you. They're not looking out for their workers. They're looking out for their bottom line, and they're looking out for positive PR. And what they really need to do is stop being vicious to their warehouse workers and give them enough breathing room to be able to take a damn break.
Yeah. So it sounds like it came from two places. One is the management class that thought, oh my God, let's make this so zen. Let's make it Amazon.
So clever.
Right, and why? Because they look at it from their perspective. They think, if I had an extra half hour of yoga during the day, I'd feel great. Yeah, but you're not working the warehouse, right? You already got a nice cushy job, and you have completely different rules than a warehouse worker. The guy's trying to get 5 more minutes to go to the bathroom so he's not late by the time he comes back. And you're giving him yoga? You're giving him well-being activities? If I'm working a factory line and you say, okay, you have an extra half hour, you can either use it to sit down and eat lunch and use the restroom, etc. A little longer than your normal lunch would be, which I'm sure varies by different places, but the stories we've covered before, it's about a half an hour, right? And these factories are gigantic, so you have to run over, eat right away, and run back. The bathroom breaks are usually 5 minutes. This is on average, it varies, right? And again, you have to run to the bathroom, go to the bathroom and run back. And if they said to me, okay, now you get an extra half an hour, but you have to go into the yoga pod, I'd be like, oh, for Christ's sake, that does not help my well-being, okay? No. Even if you provide it as an option, it really does almost nothing for me. I can go home and meditate. I'm not against meditation. I have my own version of it, which is walking around the block and and thinking about life, and that's okay. But that's on me, brother. From you, I need a bathroom break and a lunch break.
Yeah.
So don't tell me about how I need to be well. So I have more, but yes.
Yeah, meditation is like getting sober, right? Like, hear me out on this. You have to want to get sober in order to succeed at it. People telling you that you need to meditate makes you want to do the exact opposite. Like, I've been there, right? Like,
you're so right.
I can't stand. Like, I actually do meditate now, but it's because I want it. It's because it's something that I've decided I would like to do. It's not so like if Jake saw me struggling at work and came to me and was like, Anna, I think that you need to do guided meditation. First of all, luckily we have the kind of relationship where I could laugh and not take it seriously, but that's not the case at Amazon, right? So there's a level of coercion involved, especially when it comes to those hourly prompts to get up and stretch. And again, like, there are very simple asks from the warehouse workers. It's just that Amazon executives and management has to listen to those very simple requests. Give us more time to take bathroom breaks. Stop checking our bags and treating us as if we're thieves. That's another thing they do. Like, Bessemer, Alabama warehouse workers who spoke to the press specifically talked about losing time during their breaks because managers would want to do bag checks. Can you imagine, you guys, going into work with your colleagues or management assuming that you're some sort of thief, and then they have to check your bag? Imagine how demoralizing and disgusting that is. But they don't want to change that. Instead, they're going to do this ridiculous, like, ooh, we're so new age. No, this is not cute. This is not smart. I'm not in any way going to give them positive PR for this. I know exactly what this is. It's a game, and I'm not interested in playing. And neither are the warehouse workers who deserve to be treated as human beings.
Yeah, so the hourly prompts sound like they're out of 1984. Okay, now's the time we stretch. And I know, my guess is that it partly comes from Chinese practices. Because in a lot of the Chinese factories, they have them do stretching, et cetera, so that they don't get injured and can be more productive. It is not in service of the worker, it is in service of the factory.
Yep.
And so, and the last thing about that is, guys, look, I get it. Every business is gonna wanna be productive and as productive as they can be. But when you don't build enough cushion in there, you create an untenable situation. So it's much better to take a 5% hit on your productivity and let people be human beings, both in terms of the amount of breaks and the time of the breaks, right? And in terms of, hey, well, if we don't check their bags, we might lose 0.5% of our inventory because that happens across the country, right? Yeah, that's true, you might, right? But maybe you get more out of like treating people as decent human beings.
Making work enjoyable for your workers, right? Because I'll tell you this, when I'm enjoying my time at work, that's when I'm the most productive. That's when I wanna be there. That's when I wanna go the extra mile. It's when I enjoy the environment. But they don't wanna do that because that would require them to treat their workers as human beings as a result, as opposed to human capital. That's what they see their workers as, human capital, a cost.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that even if it hits, make up a number, 1% hit in productivity because some people do take stuff home in their bags, right? That is worth it to suffer that 1% hit so you don't demean everyone who works for you. So you don't treat them as thieves and assume that they're bad intention and create a toxic environment, right? And so they've got to learn to build in a cushion of humanity into their productivity numbers. And so far, corporations in America have not been able to show us that they have.
All right, let's get to our next story. The Trumps. Ivanka Trump has decided to play dumb in a deposition. Ivanka Trump has decided to play dumb in a deposition regarding the investigation over the Trump inauguration and how that money for the inauguration was spent. Now, there's some indication that the Trump campaign took quite a bit of that money and overcharged for a Trump property to host the event. So that's what this investigation is about. But the reason why this is important is because the person that Ivanka Trump is being asked about is Allen Weisselberg. He's at the center of every investigation that the Trump organization is facing right now. So while it's true of the inaugural funding, it's also very much true of the ongoing investigation into the Trump organization allegedly inflating assets to obtain loans illegally and then deflating assets to skirt paying federal taxes. Now, who is Allen Weisselberg was the question that Ivanka Trump was asked in this deposition in December with investigators from the District of Columbia Attorney General's office as part of its lawsuit alleging the misuse of inaugural funds. And here's how she answered the question. He is I would have to see what his I don't know his exact title, but he's an executive at the company. Now, keep in mind that Ivanka Trump has been working for the Trump organization since 2005, and he is the chief financial officer. He's the CFO. And when you've been working for a company that long, you know who the executives are. You know who the CFO is.
It's beyond that, it's absurd. Don't get misled. Trump organization, because he constantly does self-puffery and he's, I'm worth $10 billion, I'm a big billionaire. No, he's bankrupted himself 6 times. He doesn't have that much money left. The Trump organization is tiny. And even if you think he's worth billions of dollars, it doesn't matter. The number of people who work at the Trump organization is not in dispute, even by the Trump people, right? It's a tiny little company. It's basically a family company. So it's not like, oh my God, Allen Weisselberg got lost in the 800 employees. There's only a handful of employees there. If Ivanka shows up to work every day, there's Allen right there. He's among the few employees you have. He's the one that runs all the numbers. The idea that she might not know exactly who Allen Weisselberg is a hilarious joke. I mean, that's basically telling the lawyers in that case, yeah, I'm lying. I'm obviously trying to hide how important Allen is because he's the one that keeps all of our books. And if he flips, we're all screwed.
You know, it's also I know that this is not some groundbreaking point, but I have to say it. It seems as though the only way to get ahead in this country is to be a white collar criminal. Really, I mean, like, because look at what they did, allegedly, okay? So the DC Attorney General sued the Trump Organization and the Presidential Inaugural Committee last year, alleging they misused more than $1 million raised by the nonprofit by grossly overpaying for the use of event space at the Trump Hotel in Washington for the 2017 inauguration. Like, it's just, all they see is like, if this is proven to be true, opportunities to siphon off money for themselves by overcharging for their properties, by the Trump administration insisting on holding all of these official events and meetings with foreign leaders on Trump properties in order to pay himself. Why not? That's what this is all about. That's what this was all about from the very beginning for Donald Trump. You think he cared about representing the best interests of the people who still till this day unfortunately support him, even though he ripped them off? Didn't actually offer anything to change their lives materially. I mean, he certainly didn't improve the living conditions for the very people who support him, but okay, I mean, I'm done trying to persuade those people. If they support him, they support him. It is what it is. But people like Donald Trump and now his offspring just see opportunities to rip people off and transfer money that they don't deserve, did not earn, to their own bank accounts.
Yeah. So Jennifer Weisselberg is the former daughter-in-law of Alan Weisselberg, and we showed you at the end of last week, she came out on CNN and said, when they asked, will Alan flip on Trump? She just said very succinctly, yes. And so now the question as to whether he'll do it is, how much criminality has Alan Weisselberg participated in, his son Barry, the one that she was married to, and do they have the goods on that? Because if they do, then a guy like Alan Weisselberg, who was unscrupulous enough to work with Trump for all these years, and according to everyone that was around them, and then some people that were in the organization like Michael Cohen saying, yes, they broke the law countless times, right? Will he then go to prison to help Donald Trump? It seems unlikely. It seems more likely that he'll flip to save himself and his son. In which case Trump would be in trouble for the first time in his life. Because look, I used to think that it was that there might have been issues about money laundering and the Russians. I was on Michael Cohen's podcast. I asked him about that. He minimized it. I don't know that he's telling the truth, but he said what's much bigger issue is, as he talked about in congressional hearings, the constantly deflating their asset prices to cheat on their taxes and inflating their asset prices, this for the same assets, to get good valuations for insurance purposes, et cetera, right? So that's classic white collar crime, and Anna's right. And Anna, I was thinking about that over the weekend too, because we all play by these rules, but that's because we don't have much power. And if you went outside the rules, you would be crushed.
Exactly.
But with folks with a lot of power, the rules are optional to them because they have a team of lawyers. So then the lawyers go in there and they mangle the rules and they fight the rules. And so nothing is what it seems to be. So Trump then doesn't pay his taxes for decade after decade after decade, but he never goes to jail and he doesn't have to face those consequences because he sends his army of lawyers in there, and his lawyers cost a lot less than the taxes he cheated on.
Right.
And then this inauguration committee, they spent over $100 million. Nobody knows what the hell $100 million went to on a tiny little inauguration, right? And so
it was a big crowd.
Yeah, and now Melania's former friend, one of her top friends, is saying publicly, "Look, man, nobody knows where that money went, and a lot of it went into the hands of Trump and his allies." Rick Gates, who was his deputy chair for his campaign in 2016, said in Manafort's trial, which she points out, that yeah, I might have stolen some of the money. I'm paraphrasing, but that was in open court. He talked about how he might have used it for personal reasons. Nobody even followed up, or maybe they've been following up and we're about to find out. And those are the cases in New York that we told you about last week, the Manhattan DAs and the Attorney General for New York. But if they stole that level of money, both from when they were in government and before they were in government, yes, if there's any justice in the world at all, and if rules are applied consistently and America means anything and our Justice Department isn't a joke, yes, then he would face very severe criminal offenses. But right now, at best, it's 50-50.
No one's going to jail. I think that's the prediction that I'm gonna make for whatever it's worth. No one, even if there's a mountain of evidence, even if there are convictions, no one's going to prison. This is what happens with people who are powerful. We saw it happen in the 2008 recession where Wall Street committed, Wall Street executives committed all sorts of fraud to, basically beef up securities that were pretty much useless, worthless, had toxic assets, toxic mortgages. No one relevant went to prison for that.
They got a kid who was like in his 20s or 30s.
Yes, I remember that. One person, and it was like the least powerful person in Wall Street.
It was the most obvious scapegoat in American history.
Poor guy.
Yeah, and everybody else, they're like, oh, you committed billions of dollars of fraud, you're free to go. And Eric Holder, it's not just Republicans and it's not just Trump. When you talk about the establishment, both Republicans and Democrats do it. Eric Holder, in essence, said in front of Congress that if they put the bankers in jail, it would affect the banks and that would affect the global economy, and they didn't want to risk it. In other words, they were too big to jail.
Yep.
Well, that means there's no equal justice in the country. Rich people don't even, the rules are optional for them. And Trump is the king of that. And then he'll have his vigilantes howl, oh, so unfair. Now the poor orange leader can't break every law and cheat and rob us of taxpayer money. Oh. And then because of that, he's even less likely to go to jail. And usually most of the people in politics are cowards and they'll usually give into that, including, well, let's see how New York does. Let's see how they do. But I would be shocked if I said 50-50, but Anna's right. It's not 50-50. I'd be surprised to shocked if Trump actually went to prison.
All right, we got to go to break. When we come back, Meghan McCain is worried about conflicts of interest in the media without being able to reflect on herself. We have that story and more when we come back.
All right, guys, one more programming note. Dr. Rashad Ritchie is gonna sit in for John as a guest host on Damage Report tomorrow. So make sure that you're checking that out live at 1 o'clock Eastern. And Francesca Fiorentini is going to be with him. So that's going to be a great show. Definitely check that out. And tonight, live old school for everybody. And you guys can participate as well. 10 o'clock Eastern, me, Ben, and Mark Thompson. And controversy around what I did on Instagram. The word creepy was used earlier. We're gonna have a conversation about it. It's going to be dangerous. So all of you political hacks in the Democratic machine, get ready to take notes. So new YouTube members that just signed up: Mary Huff, Charles E, Sister J, Caribbean Cuisine. Okay, love it. Thank you for being Young Turks members and helping us to get the truth out there and fight for change. All right, lots of folks on Twitch. OVNYC says, love you guys for your authenticity and honest reporting. You shed light on the truth that is often untold or disregarded. I appreciate you. OV, we appreciate you. We can't do it without you. Tazzer 5000 wrote in, love the show and love all the hosts. 5 months here, 10 plus with TYT. That's awesome. Thank you. Hey DD Mama, a super fun name already, wrote in, here's the 6 months of Bezos bucks. Love TYT. Thanks for keeping this progressive sane in the Southeast. So guys, the Bezos bucks reference, if you haven't heard yet, is in reference to if you have Amazon Prime, signing up for us on Twitch is free. Even if you have a subscription somewhere else, we would deeply appreciate it. It makes a big difference to us, and you could find out how to do that. We still get the revenue, obviously, but it's totally free for you. Go to tyt.com/prime to learn how. Trill South wrote, boom. Nug wrote in, TYT's fire. Lord Kane wrote in, take my Bezos bucks. Just Jen Period wrote in, it's my Twitch birthday, you all. All right, happy Twitch birthday. Melissa the Defender gifted 5 subs and 1,000 bits. There's so much more. You guys had wonderful comments, but I'm out of time. All right, thank you to everyone. tyt.com/join to get the second bonus episode of Old School and TYT tonight. We'll be back. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys, more news.
All right. The View kicked off its Friday episode breaking down the controversy surrounding CNN correspondent Chris, well, he's not a correspondent, but anchor Chris Cuomo and his way of handling stories involving the governor of New York, his brother, right, Andrew Cuomo. Now, Meghan McCain wasted no time, basically displaying her hypocrisy on why she has an issue with Chris Cuomo. Let's just quickly watch that and we'll comment.
We're all in positions where, we work in media and politics and we have to talk about people that we love. Quite frankly, if my dad had been accused of sexual assault, I would be talking about it on The View because I'm not a snowflake and I'm not Chris Cuomo, and I too love my family and love my dad, but there's no crying in baseball. This is the job we signed up for. If you can't hack it, you should do something else.
She has that job because her dad was her dad. And also because The View does better with ratings when it has a disagreeable person, notably a conservative person on the panel to serve as its heel. And to be fair to Meghan, she's an important part of that show because without her, I don't know if it would be entertaining or I don't know if it would get any attention. But at the heart of this, Meghan McCain didn't get that position because she has amazing talents and skills and journalistic abilities. She got it because John McCain, a senator who of course has passed away, was her father. I also don't believe that she would be willing to cover her father allegedly engaging in sexual misconduct had that been a story. I just don't believe her. That's not the case. I know I'm speculating, but that's just what I believe.
Yeah, well, the only part that's believable in that is that if it involved her father, she would be desperate to talk about it because that's how she used to start every sentence or every other sentence. Well, my father, I don't know if you know him, is John McCain, said this.
Yeah.
My father. And now you're talking about Chris Cuomo's related to Andrew Cuomo, and that's a conflict of interest. I mean, come on, that's gotta be a joke, right? That's a joke. I mean, she's the least qualified person on television to say that. You could have a family that was successful and still be really good at your job. But we've seen these folks come on, the Chelsea Clintons and the Jenna Bushes and etc. They get paid tons of money to do a couple of segments a year. It's awfully convenient. At least Megyn works for a living. She actually shows up every day, right? And she is part of the controversy. That's true, right? But what are the percentage chance that Meghan McCain would have gotten that job if she was not Senator McCain's daughter? Let's be honest. 0%. 0%.
And also,
right?
No crying in baseball. She complains about being the only conservative on that panel and how difficult it is to be her and how it's not fair. That's all she does on that show. Aside from angering other people, which is why that show is the show that people love to hate. Like, that's why it gets the attention it does. But you can't say there's no crying in baseball without just taking just a brief moment to reflect on your own behavior on the very show you're making these claims on. Like, she complains all the time. There's a lot of crying in baseball, apparently.
Non-stop. I mean, she cried either the same day or the next day when they were going to break. She's like, why are we going to break? I mean, like every time there's any conversation, she's aggrieved. So look, in terms of the Cuomo thing, we talked about it in earlier shows. We even did a poll about it and we asked you guys, hey, do you think that Chris Cuomo should face disciplinary action for helping his brother Andrew Cuomo strategize about how to handle this scandal? And a lot of you guys agreed with what I said, which is 70% saying no, really 71% if you round up, and 29% saying yes.
Surprising.
And the reason why I thought he should not face disciplinary action is because who are we kidding? Of course he's gonna talk to his brother about it. All these anchors pretending to be neutral or objective is absurd. And so that gets to the much larger conflict of interest in this story.
Yes.
Which is that really most of the folks on TV is a circle of elitists that all already knew each other, that are all already incredibly powerful, and most of them are millionaires.
Yeah, and can I just add one other thing, Cenk? Like, CNN literally has a hiring strategy of taking people who used to work in Washington and making them correspondents rather than hiring trained journalists. That in and of itself is conflict of interest, because you're dealing with people who have close ties to Washington, and you're also simultaneously presenting yourself as a journalistic organization that's speaking truth to power. How are you gonna speak truth to power when everyone employed at your establishment is powerful, comes from power, serves in powerful positions, will continue to do so? That's not speaking truth to power. That's literally having a policy of implementing biases that favor the powerful within your institution.
Yeah, so there's two elements to that. One is the politicians, and every cable news outlet does it. Fox News hires Karl Rove, Newt Gingrich. I mean, if you need Mike Huckabee, if you need a job while running between running for president or whatever else you're gonna run for, you go to Fox News and they give you a lot of money. You do the same propaganda, you get branding, etc. It's a farmhouse for the Republican Party. MSNBC, same thing for Democrats. Claire McCaskill, we had to have her as an analyst. Really, why? She lost her race. She lost a really winnable race in Missouri where she was the sitting senator, and she bungled that race to no end. We need her expertise. No, you don't. Nicole Wallace used to be the spokesperson for Bush and Cheney. Now she works at MSNBC.
Exactly.
And why? They're all powerful, right? And so do they have the perspective of the powerless? Absolutely not. They have the exact opposite perspective. Let alone the fact that you got the heir to the Swanson fortune on Fox News, that's Tucker Carlson.
Stephanie Ruhle, former hedge fund manager, come on.
You got the heir to the Vanderbilt fortune on CNN, that's Anderson Cooper. We're talking about conflict of interest. All of cable news is a conflict of interest. All right, bonus episode, you guys are gonna love it. All of you members, we'll see you there.
So a lot of progressive office holders are doing something fun. I like fun. They're doing the last 2 years in 2 minutes. Okay, we're gonna try it here. First, I wanna let you guys know about the years before that. Hey, remember we started the Just Democrats here on the Young Turks. It was officially launched on our air, basically by you guys. And then we featured AOC, we featured Cori Bush, and Ro Khanna became the first ever Just Democrat incumbent, all on the Young Turks. Now, the last 2 years have been a spectacular spectacular follow-up to that. So let's put the 2 minutes on the clock and do this. Young Turks got to start back in 2002, and I think we've been an important part of the progressive movement ever since. What we mainly do is amplify the progressive voice and candidates out there, and I think we've done a pretty good job. Right now, we're currently #1 most engaged news politics network online, beating CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, all of them. We're #1 in total minutes watched. That means not only the number of people watching, but how long they watch. We just crossed 20 million followers and 500 million monthly views. Now, why? That's because actually the country's progressive. It's 2/3 progressive, and you guys have allowed us to be your voice, and we're incredibly thankful for that. So what did we do with that voice? Well, let's look at 2019. We went all over the country talking to you guys and the candidates. So we were in Miami, we were in Detroit, we were in Houston, and we were in Iowa. In fact, we were all over Iowa. You guys were all over Iowa, and all of the candidates saw you guys. We had wonderful people speaking, like the one and only Nina Turner at our rallies. Bernie Sanders stopped by, Andrew Yang, Elizabeth Warren. We interviewed almost everyone on the campaign trail, with the exception of Biden and Buttigieg. And we held them accountable. We even did a progressive economic pledge, and so many wonderful people signed on to that. Bernie Sanders, Warren, Marianne Williamson, AOC, the entire squad, Justice Democrats, and so many others. Now, on top of all that, we started a show called The Conversation, where we featured so many progressive thinkers, writers, and candidates. And one of the candidates we featured in 2019 was Jamal Bowman. Here comes Jamal Bowman. Then we had an amazing 2020. We hired a climate reporter. Damage Report passed 500,000 subscribers. Young Turks passed 5 million subscribers. We're getting the message out to more and more people. Bernie Sanders comes on in the heat of the primary. He comes on after the election to say what we're gonna do for the future. And then Marie Newman wins. Jamal Bowman wins. Cori Bush wins. And then just when you thought it couldn't get any better, here comes Nina Turner. Hello, somebody. And she's running for Congress, and she comes on the Young Turks first. On election week, we had nearly 2 million hours of viewing. We're #1 destination for progressives. You made all that happen. This is amazing, and thank you for those 2 years. What, I went past 2 minutes? Of course!
Viewers had asked for an interview with the TYT Lizard. Mr. Lizard. Oh, you changed colors today. Nice. I don't even know how you feel about us. Do you even like us?
Well, you guys made me this awesome house, so I'm kind of in your debt. I was found outside on the street, and you gave me a home. Granted, it was a really crappy home for a while, but then through the power of fundraising, I became a person who has a multi-level Trump-style mansion.
You do. By the way, you never looked better, man. Normally, you're just green or just brown, but today you're in mid-lizard, right?
I'm not very smart. I'm a lizard, so I don't know how the science works. I guess this is just my mood. It's not every day that thresholds like this are broken. I'm just so excited. I can't contain my pigmentation.
And now you're showing it off.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never seen the lizard like this before. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. We got a couple of fun stories for you guys, and then a fun topic I'm looking forward to. Apparently, Anna was creepy. I'm curious what it is.
I definitely was. And the worst is when you're doing it, you don't realize that it is creepy, and then you realize it later after the fact, and then you obsess over it. So I'll tell you guys what that is in just a minute. But I did want to make sure that we talked about this story because it resonated with me and experiences I had in school, and it's just unacceptable, and this culture needs to change. So let's talk about it. A Florida high school took it upon themselves to edit images of female students who they believed were dressed in a risque fashion, showing a little too much skin. And this is unacceptable. I'll show you examples of the before and after photos so you'll see what I'm talking about. But more importantly, what this does is it communicates to female students that the very normal way that they're dressed is inappropriate, that they're somehow being quote unquote slutty in the way that they dress. And that type of messaging to young female students is unacceptable. It just is, especially at public schools. Now, private schools, they might be religious. They don't have to abide by the same rules that many public schools do, but this is just unacceptable in public schools. You can't do this. And I'll explain in more detail in just a second. Let me give you the details of the story first. So 80 students, all female, at Bartram Trail High School in St. John's had their yearbook photos altered without their permission. They didn't even know. They didn't find out until they got their yearbooks. Exposed shoulders and low necklines were photoshopped to be covered up.
Yeah.
Shoulders? Shoulders.
Shoulders.
No, okay.
We're talking about shoulders.
One time, fairly recently, I was doing the show and my shoulders were exposed. And a female viewer took it upon herself to tweet to me about how inappropriate my outfit was. Now, I am a professional and I kept it professional, but I will like to professionally communicate again that that was an inappropriate comment.
Yeah.
I'm a grown woman, and if you are in any way offended by bare shoulders, take a nap. You need a break. You need to like really rethink life.
Yeah, look, don't make me come in here in a tank top.
No, please don't do that. Now,
you want to get offended?
Speaking of inappropriate apparel.
You want to get offended? Okay, no, seriously, guys. And you see the pictures too. They're like,
let's go to one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, this is what you photoshopped?
It's insane.
So the real picture's on the left, obviously, and although I'm not sure it is obvious, it's like, why did you even bother photoshopping this? And the Photoshop version is on the right. So
imagine how embarrassed you feel as a young lady, because the school is communicating to you in doing that, and what they're communicating to you is that they think that you're some sort of hussy.
Hussy.
Right? That you're like, they're basically, I mean, look, it's the school administrators saying that you're dressed like a slut. That's what it communicates. And I'm saying that as a woman who experienced similar things in high school, right? It's just, it's not right. And I think that the administrators need to really think about what kind of impact that has on young women, especially young women who are not in any way dressed inappropriately.
Yeah, this story's about to have a great twist near the end, so hang in there for that. But the hypocrisy of how they treat guys, of course, is ridiculous. So there are guys in Speedos in the yearbook because they're on the swim team. Have you seen guys in Speedos? It's a little bit more revealing than a shoulder shot, okay? I remember I was a wrestler in high school. Have you seen guys in wrestling trunks? So none of that is ever an issue. But if we got shoulders and etc., then we're gonna regulate. These are ninth graders, so they're telling a ninth grade girl you're too sexualized. Is it really her, or maybe is it the way you're looking at it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just over sexualizing young girls' bodies, and there's something wrong with that, obviously. Now, one ninth grader pointed out that apparent hypocrisy that you mentioned, Cenk. Riley O'Keefe is the name of this ninth grader. The double standard in the yearbook is more so that they looked at our body and thought just a little bit of skin showing was sexual. But then they looked at the boys for the swim team photos and other sports photos and thought that was fine. And that's really upsetting and uncomfortable. And I agree with Riley on that. Riley also continues to say, you're not only affecting their photo, it's not just for protecting them, you're making them uncomfortable and feel like their bodies aren't acceptable in a yearbook.
Yeah, and so, look, as a parent, everybody's got different lines. So if my kids are wearing something that I think is too revealing, like I might ask my daughter to put on shorts underneath a skirt if the skirt doesn't quite fit her exactly right, in my opinion, etc. Right? But that's for me to regulate. But not everybody feels that way. They feel like they got to look at other people's daughters. Don't cross that line. That's a really bad idea. And here in this story, there was one of the parents that's quoted, Rachel DeQuinn.
We've got a graphic.
Yeah, so let's put it up. Because she says, if parents aren't teaching at home how daughters should dress and dress decently, then the school has to parent.
Hey, Rachel, sit down. How about that? Sit down. I can't stand women telling other mothers how they need to mother or other parents how they need to parent. Sit down, Rachel, sit down, okay? It's for their parents to decide whether their outfits are acceptable or not. Sit the fuck down. Can't stand parents like that. Oh, are you breastfeeding? You need to breastfeed. Oh, are you doing this? You need to do, shut the fuck up. I can't stand these types of women. What is wrong with you? And the thing that drives me crazy is, as women, they know what it's like to be constantly judged as a parent. So don't turn around and abuse other parents the same way you've been abused. Sit down, Rachel.
Okay, so I can't add that much to that, but I do want to say last couple things. And there is a fun twist, like I said. Look, the idea that other parents are looking at other girls and then going and talking to their parents or the school and saying, I was looking at how she was dressed and I thought it was too sexual and I'd like to regulate. Are you nuts? What are you doing? Don't do that. And that's up to them. And it sounds like Rachel's conservative, right? Like, well, if your parents aren't doing the job, then I guess the school has to parent for them and tell them how to dress because we're all gonna be Victorian now, right? And again, every parent is comfortable in a different way and it's okay. But as long as you're making the choice and not Rachel or Karen or whoever else, right? Yep. And in this case, Rachel, imagine, or any of you out there, if progressives did the same thing. Oh, idiot parents at our school are dressing their kids inappropriately, right? They don't have masks on, or they don't have this on, or whatever it is, or they're teaching them inappropriate things about religion or whatever it is. So you know what? The school should take over the parenting so that dumbass conservative parents don't mislead their kids. Imagine if that happened. Oh my God, heads would explode. Oh, it's indoctrination. But when conservatives say it, oh, these parents don't know how to parent. Let the school take over as their parents and enforce conservative ideas on them. All of a sudden, not indoctrination.
Look, I don't care what their political beliefs are. Don't care if you're conservative, don't care if you're progressive, don't care if you're like an ultra leftist. Sit down. Don't judge other parents for their parenting. It's a difficult job to do. And the examples of what they photoshopped in this school does not in any way indicate that parents are letting their children, their female children, dress inappropriately to school. Anyway, so let's get to the fun twist before my blood pressure leads to severe issues. So there are, and I love this, there are male students who have decided to stand up for the female students, to show solidarity. And that is a wonderful thing, right? So, and look, it's not the first time the school has faced issues. In March, students were outraged when administrators at the high school stood in the hallway and called out dozens of girls or took them out of class for violating the dress code. One male teacher called out a student who wore a zip-up jacket over a sports bra. The girl was ordered to remove the jacket and wear a t-shirt that school officials gave her. The girl also described what happened to whatever, that doesn't matter.
Okay, so in that case, it's unbelievable. She comes in, she is not taking off the jacket. The jacket is part of her outfit. A male teacher makes her ask a female teacher. Female teacher says, no, her outfit's fine. The male teacher still doesn't care or believe it and goes, no, I want you to take off the jacket in front of everyone. But it's part of the outfit. It's like asking her to take off her shirt so everybody can look at her sports bra.
It's insane.
And so this is in defense of her virtues. And so then the boys come in and go, oh yeah, then we'll dress like the girls and see what you do. I love that. Now that's solidarity, and that's young people being completely different than the older generation. So they put on wigs, not all of them, but a lot of them, put on wigs and skirts and came in the same outfits, and were they all thrown out? Of course not, they were guys. And so, way to stick together, guys, I love that. So that's a great ending to this story, but guys, I know a lot of you watch Fox News, but it ain't 1955. move on with your life. And by the way, if you believe in freedom, you should also believe in other people's freedom.
Exactly.
Their freedom to parent as they wish.
Yeah, sit down, Rachel. All right.
That was clear.
Yeah. All right. Meltdown. Let's get to the next one.
We're going to break, and when we come back, you can continue talking, but now we're going to break, so we'll be right back. I'm cutting you off because we have to go, Megan.
That quality entertainment over at The View. Now, what preceded that meltdown? Well, apparently there was a discussion about Marjorie Taylor Greene, who compared being forced to wear a mask at work is the equivalent of the genocide that killed, or the Holocaust that killed 6 million Jews. So Marjorie Taylor Greene made that stupid statement, and we should actually watch. Let's take a look at the next video.
This woman is mentally ill. You know, we can look back in a time in history where people were told to wear a gold star, and they were definitely treated like second-class citizens, so much so that they were put in trains and taken to gas chambers in Nazi Germany. And this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about.
Okay, so they were discussing that on The View, and rather than condemn that kind of ridiculous rhetoric, Meghan McCain decided to immediately deflect and focus on members of the so-called squad. Let's watch.
I can't stand Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think she's a crazy person. I've said that over and over again, but she has been stripped of her committees. She has absolutely no legislative power in Congress whatsoever, which juxtaposed when Ilhan Omar said that Jewish people had hypnotized the world and it was all about the Benjamins. She's still on the Foreign Relations Committee and she's able to dictate our foreign policy in the United States of America. So what do you expect Republicans to do? I think that's taking a lot more action against a crazy person than I would say the Democrats are doing on the left. I would love if the energy that is being put on one crazy woman in Congress, and by the way, if she is the face of the Republicans, then the squad is the face of the Democrats. I would love Democrats to put that same type of energy onto what's happening on the left, because quite frankly, this is how people get red-pilled. They're red-pilled when they see the blatant bias in the media. It's because the media doesn't want the squad to look bad. They just want Marjorie Taylor to look bad.
Oh yeah, the media has been super friendly to progressive members of Congress, especially the young women in the squad. I mean, remember the glowing coverage that AOC got, especially when she was in the middle of a spat with Nancy Pelosi? I think the New York Times was super friendly to her. I mean, it's ridiculous. So she brings up Ilhan Omar, who has apologized profusely for her unfortunate use of language in being critical of the Israeli government. The Israeli government. And honestly, her critique, her criticism is coming from the right place. But she used the wrong words and unfortunately reminded people of tropes that she should have been a lot more delicate, a lot more careful in the language she chose, but the points that she was making were valid. And she apologized for not using the right rhetoric. That's very different from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who shows no remorse for her actions, who has physically threatened members of Congress, including AOC, who has incessantly repeated lies about the 2020 election, and who has proven herself to be, honestly, and I'm not just saying this to insult her, it's just demonstrably true, one of the dumbest women I have ever encountered in my entire career. Like completely unaware of how stupid she is.
Yeah, so let's do the comparison. So first of all, I just want to correct the record because Meghan McCain lied there. She said that Ilhan Omar said the Jews hypnotized the world. She did not say that. She said Israel did, that there's a giant distinction there. It's still wrong to say because of what it harkens back to potentially, and it was said in 2012, and she's now apologized 38 times for it. Now, the other reference that she made is all about the Benjamins. That was directly in regards to lobbyists. And yes, that's what lobbyists do. They bribe politicians. They all do it. I don't think she should apologize for that at all. I don't know if it was also a play on Benjamin Netanyahu's name, in which case it would be perfectly fine, okay? So on the other hand, if you're outraged by this, oh no, Cenk, no. the thing with, it's the government, but okay, I'm still very, very, very upset by that. Marjorie Taylor Greene said that Jewish bankers built a space laser and use it to start forest fires like the Camp Fire in California.
Obviously, yeah, obviously.
Okay, and she just said, and you just heard her say that Nancy Pelosi asking them to wear masks if they haven't been vaccinated for the health of others is, quote, exactly like how the Germans did the Holocaust, loaded up Jews on a train and sent them to be murdered, exactly like it. So people are upset for a very good reason that seems to minimize the deaths of millions of people. And comparing it to something that is sanitary and helps your health, right? No, it is not exactly like that. But remember, she's a lunatic. She's also shown support for anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of QAnon online, etc. So what Meghan McCain does in her infinite ignorance is, they're both crazy, they're crazy people. Did you know I'm Senator John McCain's daughter? I'm really important, okay?
Both sides
and Ilhan Omar, who does a very legitimate critique of Israeli policy, is crazy. Don't listen to her. Israel's awesome. Never question their policies. Ilhan Omar's crazy. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jewish space lasers, also bad, but they're the same. They're the same. No, they're not the same. One drives anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that causes real damage, and then another hatchet job that Meghan McCain did in that longer version of that piece that they did on The View is she started listing all these crimes, anti-Semitic crimes against Jews in America and worldwide, and it's a horrific list that's happening right now, and we should all be deeply concerned about it. Half of them were from right wingers. And then she mixed in some Palestinians and then said it made a reference to the left wing. No. The synagogue attacks, the actual violent attacks against Jews in this country have been almost exclusively from the right wing. But that's not what Meghan McCain said. She made it seem like as if the Squad is doing it because she's an over-the-top liar.
Yep.
Okay, all right, now. But at the end of the day, if you just want to take her advice and say, oh my God, if you say Marjorie Taylor Greene is a Republican Party, then you should say the Squad is a Democratic Party. Fine, so what, great. Yes, the Squad is the Democratic Party. We'd like them to be much more representative of the Democratic Party than the current corrupt Democratic establishment. I would take them over Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in a second. And why? They're uncorrupted by corporate PAC money, which you and all of your corrupt Republican friends love, Megyn. You all run on corporate money. All of your so-called totally deeply corrupt friends, giving them oil money, bank money, drug company money, give it to me. And Manchin and Sinema do the same thing. We are fair and honest, and we call out our own side. So if we could have uncorrupted politicians, I would take that 1,000 times over the corrupted Democratic leadership, let alone the trash running the Republican Party now.
All right, let's talk about me being creepy. You ready?
Okay, that is a different topic. Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. So we're moving on.
Okay.
So I wasn't here last Thursday because there was an intimate memorial service for Michael Brooks, who passed away in July of last year, a close friend of mine, and I was kind of dreading, like, I've grieved and I think I've processed it, but I was terrified that I was gonna be a mess at that event. And there was pressure to go up and speak, and I did speak, and I'm actually proud of myself in like keeping it together. Christian went up and spoke, which, he cried like a baby because he's sensitive and a sweet soul. But anyway, that's beside the point. Here's the creepy thing I did. Someone shows up, someone I'm familiar with, I'm not gonna name who it is, with her baby. Adorable, super cute baby, and her partner. And I had never seen her baby in person. And I don't know, I just didn't even, she's very protective, this is important. She's very protective of her child, does not post any photos of her child, does not keeps this child away from the public at all costs, right? And I just, for some reason, had a lapse in judgment. And once I saw the baby, I was like, oh my God, and immediately approached the child and started, God, I'm so embarrassed. I think I squeezed the baby's face a little bit. Like went like this.
That's the creepy thing?
Yes. Jake,
no, that's
I
not
don't have
creepy.
permission to put my hands on her child. So last night, as I'm trying to fall asleep, I don't know what happened, but randomly I remembered that moment. And I was like, oh my God, I did something super creepy. And she's probably tried to be polite and not say anything. But now I know it was like, so should I apologize?
No,
Is that crazy?
No, you're a weirdo. Okay, let's go through this, okay? So number one, I'm with Christian. I can't make it through a speech at a funeral. I just can't, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody's different. And I'm really glad you went. I mean, we missed you on the show, but it was a good moment of closure. Okay, now on to the fun stuff. So I had a friend who was very protective of their baby a while back. And she literally had Purell throughout the house. This is now a long time ago, so it had nothing to do with COVID or anything. There's Purell when you walk in, and there is at like every table as you go by, okay? And if you were gonna touch the baby, I mean, you had to like take a shower in Purell, like, right? And like with Purell and stuff.
Yeah.
But that's actually not great for the baby. They're supposed to be exposed to some degree of how humans live, and hence some of the viruses, etc. Now it feels uncomfortable saying that because of coronavirus, but it's true. Otherwise, it's too sterile in an environment, and that's basically, and this is apples and oranges. But what happened to Native Americans? They were not exposed to the diseases that came over from Europe, and so when they got the disease blankets, even though it didn't affect the Europeans very much, it absolutely devastated indigenous tribes here in America. And you create a microcosm of that. Again, it's really rough in apples and oranges, but with your kids, that's why I told you guys the funny story on another episode where, because I know that when Pro was like 6 months old.
You rolled him around.
Yeah, I took him in the yard and rolled him around in the yard. Okay, and then he was a really roly-poly kid too. He rolled really well. Then I rolled him back. Okay, and he's solid as a rock now. You see that? It works. Might be slightly anecdotal.
Dr. Cenk, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so
Cenk, we're in the middle of a pandemic too. Like we're, things are getting better, but still, like,
nah. I mean,
it was weird. It was almost as if something took control of my body and mind. I just didn't think.
Yeah.
I just gravitated toward this adorable kid, and I couldn't help it. Like I had to squeeze his cheeks.
Okay, so now to the heart of this controversy.
Yeah.
Number one, that's called being human, okay, and it's actually what a nice person does. Like, there aren't a lot of times that Stephen Miller would be like, "Oh my God, such a cute baby." He'd be like, "Can I deport it?" Right? So it's not a bad thing. I think between the two of you, who's right, who's wrong, I don't know. I mean, if somebody that I knew, like in any way, squeezed my baby's cheeks, I would find that to be the single most normal thing ever. And so, guys, I know they're precious, et cetera, but you gotta ease up a little bit.
And she's not, by the way, she didn't say anything to me, right? So she might be totally fine with it, and maybe I'm just having a weird panic attack about that moment. But here's another thing I noticed about myself during because this was the first, wow, I just realized this is the first time I was like among a group of people outside of like work and family. Wow. So I was really touchy overall, not just with the baby, but like I put my arm around her, the mom. I was like putting my hand on the shoulder of whoever I was talking. I don't know, and that wasn't me before. And like weirdly enough, now I'm like weirdly touchy. Like I don't know where.
Okay, well that can be taken out of context. I'm now officially weirdly touchy.
No.
Okay. Somewhere Mendoza is taking notes.
100%. Come at me, bitch.
But no, look, I get it because of coronavirus. You want to have less physical contact, and if someone's, even if we think they're overly protective of their kids, that's their right to be. So yes, technically, I guess you shouldn't have done it, right? But at the same time, now this is kind of an old school rule. If someone is overly aggrieved by that, then the fault switches to them. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
You're only slightly guilty at most. And she hasn't reacted at all, so she has done nothing wrong at all.
Right.
But if she overreacted, then the blame would go to her. You see what I'm saying? Because, yeah, because you don't need to drown your kids in Purell. It's not a thing. It's not even medically correct. So I get it. Every parent's different, and they seem so fragile, right? But it turns out you can roll them. It's okay. You know what was funny and weird about that story is that I didn't roll him around in our yard. I rolled him around in someone else's yard.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, that makes sense.
Why?
Because he might already have immunity to whatever stuff you have going on in your yard. You got to take him to a different yard.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course. That's why I did it. Yeah.
Duh.
No, we were just out somewhere, and I had forgotten to roll him around. So I was like, I'll just do it now. And I rolled him around in somebody else's lawn, then put him back in the car, and then we gave him a shower. Obviously, when he went back.
That's too funny.
Could you imagine? You look out the window, you're like, honey, you're gonna want to see this. Someone's rolling their baby around in our yard.
Dude, there used to be something called the McDonald's Play Place. So there would be McDonald's restaurants, and before they tried to make them look like hip cafes, they had giant like play pens for kids, like with monkey bars and the ball pen, and then like that weird like noodle tube that you like, I remember playing in them. And those were, it was bacteria central.
Yeah.
Solid as a rock, I am.
Yeah, well, look, we all made it out okay, except the ones that didn't. But still, don't go to extremes. Those playpens turned out to be a bad idea.
Yeah.
And Purell at every corner is also not a great idea. Don't overdo anything, okay? But overall, Anna, I have a ruling for you.
Yeah.
Not guilty.
Thank you.
You can sleep tonight, okay?
Right, thank you.
If it was an offense, it was an offense so minor that at most I'd give you the equivalent of a tiny traffic ticket.
It kept me up last night.
You see, that means you're a good person and you're actually overdoing that. Just calm down.
I don't like making other people feel uncomfortable, but thank you for saying that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm here to adjudicate. Okay,
it's what we do.
Yeah,
it was God, Anna. It was God. Thanks, Gold.
Okay, all right, guys. Old School, don't forget tonight live at 10 o'clock Eastern. And I read some of your comments there. Me, Mark, and Ben, we're gonna have a great time. And speaking of creepy, I'm gonna talk about Instagram and what I did there. It's controversial. That was actually controversial. It ain't about squeezing babies' cheeks. Get a load of politician Anna Kasparian. I am guilty of squeezing too many baby cheeks.
Oh, come on.
I know, I'm kidding.
COVID, protective parents. Anyway, let's move on. We adjudicated it already.
It's adjudicated.
You guys, he doesn't know how to end a show. I'll end the show, okay? Thank you for watching. We love you guys. No, that's not today.
Isn't Big Rick Energy today?
Oh, yes. Yes, Big Rick Energy, everybody. Check it out. Twitch channel, twitch.tv/TYT. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Hide your kids, hide your wife, and hide your husband because they raping everybody out here.